Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
The acquaintance had clearly not gone well, and the pause was somewhat prolonged. The two men looked at each other warily and attentively. One of them, the older one, with silver gray on his temples and a piercing gaze, was Cassandra's father, Mr. Kevin, the bank owner. His whole appearance confirmed his high social status, a good suit, an expensive watch of a well-known brand on his groomed hand, and even a trail of nobleman's perfume. The second man, standing opposite, is quite young. He is dressed very modestly, but his determined look and burning eyes show that he is not a timid 10. And even though he's wearing cheap Chinese jeans and a simple shirt from the local market, he clearly has something that no amount of money can buy: dignity. This is Nicholas, Cassandra's favorite man. The girl sighed sadly. This was not how she had imagined this meeting when she had decided to introduce her boyfriend to her father. Her hopes that everything would go quietly and peacefully had been dashed, despite her attempts to smooth things over. Mutual antipathy, firmly established from the first seconds of acquaintance, could not be ignored. Wisdom and experience had won this duel of glances. "Well, young man, and what do you do?" Mr. Kevin asked in a patronizing tone as he continued to glare intently at his potential son-in-law. "I work as a car mechanic," the man replied in a calm voice, not at all embarrassed by his profession. "Nicholas is the best worker. People come from all over the county to see him. Dad, they even sign up in advance." Cassandra timidly tried to interject, but her father didn't react to her remark, didn't even turn his head in her direction. Squinting his eyes, he continued his interrogation. "So you're an auto mechanic, and you've decided to tie your life to my daughter, who graduated from a music school and a foreign university, who spends more on cosmetics alone than you earn in a week." "Dad, stop it," Cassandra burst out and pouted her lips resentfully. But the young man didn't even raise an eyebrow in response to such an obvious desire to humiliate and piss her off, remaining perfectly poised. Of course, the rich furnishings of the bride's house were astonishing and overwhelming in their splendor, at the first sight of an ordinary laborer. But after all, he knew what he was getting into and was prepared for such a conversation. "I understand your irony," he said, "but Cassandra and I love each other for real. And I have no intention of stopping there at all. I have plans, and I'm sure I can provide for your daughter." "Plans?" Mr. Kevin interjected with a sneer. "Plans require startup capital. You're relying on your rich father-in-law's money, aren't you?" The young man's patience was at an end. "I don't need your money," he declared. "I'll earn it myself, I promise." "What pathetic words," exclaimed the man, and continued, "I'd like to know the name of the future millionaire. Otherwise, I'll miss the article about you in Forbes magazine." "My last name is Smith," replied the fellow in a perfectly calm tone. And then the unexpected happened. Mr. Kevin froze in a daze, staring at his guest with eyes widened with surprise. "Smith, Nicholas Smith," he interjected with whitened lips. "And you were brought up in an orphanage." "Yes," the young man marveled, "ran away though 6 months before graduation." "How do you know?" Mr. Kevin's face was now covered with a scarlet color. It seemed as if the next moment he would have a stroke. "Daddy, what's wrong?" rushed to him, frightened by his strange condition. But the latter came to his senses quite quickly, gently dismissed her, and with a resolute step proceeded to the safe, took out some paper, and contorting his face with an angry grimace, shook it in the face of the young ones. "This is the will, where almost everything after my death goes to my daughter. Do you see it? Take one last look." They looked at him in bewilderment, waiting for further explanation. Suddenly, with an abrupt movement, the man defiantly tore the document in half at the words, "As long as you're together, you'll get nothing from me, not a penny." Cassandra's eyes widened. She clutched her head and screamed in despair. "Daddy, what are you doing? You're crazy." Tears welled up in her eyes. There was resentment and confusion in her gaze. "What have we done to you? Why do you hate us so much?" But the man continued furiously tearing the paper to pieces. The daughter only shook her head and realized that further conversation was useless. She looked sadly at his occupation and said to Nicholas in a quiet voice, "Come, help me pack my things. I have no intention of staying in this house any longer." She took her fiancé by the hand and led him to her room. There she grabbed a gym bag and began frantically throwing the essentials into it. Nicholas, overwhelmed by the luxury of the bride's accommodation, watched Cassandra's packing for a while, and then he couldn't stand it and asked a question. "Cassandra, are you sure of what you're doing?" "Yes, absolutely." She tossed back and stopped suddenly, turning half-turned so she could see the look on her fiancé's face. "Maybe you're the one who's not sure you want to be with me, now that I'm disinherited. Come on, you know I love you more than life. I just don't want you to regret your decision later. You know I won't be able to offer you equal living conditions." The girl hugged her lover and looked into his bottomless eyes. "Nicholas, I am ready to follow you to the end of the world." The sincerity of her words was not in doubt. "That's exactly where we're going right now, to the end of the world." The boy laughed and exclaimed, "Well, since you're sure, then let's go." Father paced nervously from corner to corner of the huge living room. Seeing the young ones in the corridor with a large bag in their hands, the man stopped and warned angrily, "Cassandra, you're making a mistake. Think carefully, you can still stay." "I'm sorry you don't respect my choice, Daddy," the girl said regretfully. "I'm leaving now. Goodbye." Still unable to come to terms with his daughter's excessive independence, Mr. Kevin shouted after her in frustration, "Cassandra, you can come back anytime you want, but alone, without that. Then we'll sort out the will." "I don't want your money. Not everything in life is measured by money." She tossed over her shoulder dismissively. "Goodbye." All the way Cassandra was silent. Her father's strange act made her sad and uncomfortable. What had happened? What had enraged him and caused him to react so aggressively? There was no answer to these questions. This was the first time she had seen him like this in her life. He had never boasted of his wealth before, and Cassandra had been taught from a young age to accept it calmly. But there was only one thing she regretted at that moment, that she hadn't had time to tell her father the most important thing. She was expecting a child. Maybe if she had confessed it from the beginning, his heart would have softened, and the ugly scene could have been avoided. But unfortunately, it was too late. Too much had been said and done, and Cassandra had made her decision in favor of her lover, which meant a carefree life could be forgotten. But Cassandra never thought she'd find herself practically on the streets. For the first half of her life, she had no idea that there was another life, not like hers, believing that poverty and misery existed only in fairy tales. For as long as Cassandra could remember, she had everything. A huge nursery, where the little princess had built entire cities of soft bears and dolls in lace outfits. Above the cot, a canopy of soft fat waves hung in soft pink shades, and the girl felt like a fairy in a wonderful magical world. Over the years, the room had become the refuge of a modern teenage rebel, a music center with speakers, posters of rock celebrities, laptops, phones, a wide variety of gadgets. She had all the latest innovations. And by the time she returned from studying abroad, her usual pastel-colored girl's room with a huge Rasta mirror and a large wardrobe was waiting for her. And then there was the little red car. Her father had always guessed her wishes and spared nothing for her. Yes, she didn't need anything, but from childhood the same dad had taught her that she had to earn it all. Good behavior, excellent grades, help at home, these requirements seemed to the girl logical and quite feasible. Yes, it was her father who always took care of her upbringing. It was he who formed her character and tempered her will. She almost does not remember her mum. Only her vague image and the feeling of warm, caressing hands on her head remained in her memory. Every evening she sat down on her daughter's cot, stroked her hair, and told another fairy tale about beautiful princesses, evil dragons, and brave knights. And every time in them, good triumphed over evil, as it should be. "Cassandra, I love you very much and will always love you," the woman repeated tirelessly day after day. And then she was gone. It happened suddenly and quickly. The little girl did not even have time to be frightened and realize what had happened. Only when she grew up, Cassandra learnt that her mother had been suffering from an incurable disease for several years in a row. For 3 whole years, she and her father lived alone. Of course, there was a cook, a maid, a governess, but all of them together could not even partially replace her mother. After all, the girl had already got used to such a life, and feeling the responsibility, tried to fulfill the duties of a mistress of a large house. In the morning saw her father off to work, carefully correcting his knot on his tie and revitalizing his hair. In the evening, she helped to set the table for dinner, arranged the utensils, and made sure that Daddy ate properly. But one day, completely unexpectedly for Cassandra, Marion had appeared in their lives, very young, tall and slender, with colorful, provocative makeup and revealing cleavage. Even a little girl could easily discern her intentions. Having got hold of her husband's unlimited credit card, the young wife at first went crazy, disappeared all day long in boutiques and shopping centers, and by evening came with a pile of branded paper bags with purchases, and until the night went through them in her room. The husband mollycoddled, seeing the enthusiastic eyes of the girl, and tried to look at this passion through his fingers. Marion had suffered in her youth, lived very modestly on the salary of a simple secretary. Cassandra strongly disliked her stepmother. All her feigned courtesy ended as soon as her father turned away. That's when she became a real, self-absorbed lover. But the man in love did not want to see the shortcomings of his chosen one, and the daughter did not want to upset her father. Therefore, over time between stepmother and stepdaughter formed an unspoken agreement. They simply lived in parallel universes, and only occasionally, in exceptional cases, allowed themselves to make remarks about each other. And it was Marion who put into her husband's head the idea that Cassandra should go to study abroad. Apparently, she wanted to get rid of her hated stepdaughter in this way, dreaming that the girl would marry and stay in a foreign land forever. But her hopes were not fulfilled. After diligently studying, one day she appeared again with a diploma in her hands on the doorstep of her native home. Upon her arrival, Cassandra continued to ignore the beautiful mechanical doll walking around the house in vulgar translucent robes. She had other concerns entirely. Now, as a serious graduate, the girl came to work in the bank to her father. He, remaining true to his beliefs, put forward the same requirements. The position and high position must still be earned. Therefore, despite her origins, Cassandra had to start at the bottom. At first, she had been a trainee on the floors. Then she had worked as a teller and cashier for a while, and now she was a financial consultant. The banker's daughter was not offended by such a slow career growth. With pleasure, she learnt the wisdom and subtleties of the domestic financial sphere, and where to hurry. In the money she did not need, and the thirst for power was not peculiar to her. One day, returning home during a heavy downpour, Cassandra hit something and punctured a wheel. The track was empty, and expecting help from passing drivers was a futile exercise. Fortunately, there was a car service station nearby. A young worker noticed from afar a fragile girl's figure fidgeting with her car and immediately rushed to the rescue. His sincere smile and lively gray eyes immediately fell into the girl's soul. Looking into them, she realized that the sympathy was mutual. That's how they met Nicholas. Here, the childhood and youth of the new acquaintance cardinally differed from hers. Nicholas did not remember them at all, since 2.5 years lived in an orphanage. The walls painted in the blue color and the atmosphere permeated with formality never appealed to him. The boy always felt that he was not living his own life. The strict framework of rules stifled his extraordinary personality and did not give peace. Therefore, not waiting for his adulthood, Nicholas simply ran away from there, as it seemed to him at the time, to freedom. At first he wandered the streets, slept at the railway station, and even almost joined some dysfunctional company. From the first steps on the criminal path saved, strangely enough, an unexpected police raid. His new comrades were taken to the station, and Nicholas himself managed to escape. After that, he accidentally nailed to a service station somewhere on the outskirts of the city. He got there just in the busy season and volunteered to help the workers cope with the flow of people. Brought wheels, lifted the jack, twisted nuts. The smart, hard-working guy was liked by the employees. He stayed there ever since. Nicholas was allowed to sleep in the storeroom, a comfortable cot in a warm little room, an interesting job with a good salary, a cafe with delicious food, a forest in walking distance, and a shuttle bus to the city center every 20 minutes. What else does a young romantic tired of the rigid limits set by society need? Such a free life was to his liking. Over the past few years, the guy earned respect and trust from his superiors, slowly delved into car repair, and showed great aptitude for this craft. He grasped everything on the fly. Regular customers were already well aware of the skillful hands of a clever young master and wanted to serve him. And then Cassandra appeared, amazing, sophisticated, clear-eyed, an angel in the flesh, a dream girl. The only disadvantage was her social status. After all, she was a banker's daughter. The former orphanage worker and vagrant without his own home was well aware that he was no match for such a girl. But she was so friendly and natural, not like all the nobles of high society, and they were so interesting together that the young man's indecision gradually disappeared. At first they were just friends. Sometimes Cassandra would stop on her way home, and the two of them would eat the famous shawarma from the local chef Harry and drink coffee from paper cups, chatting merrily and watching the cars go by. From time to time they met in town, walking through the park, riding the carousel, fooling around and laughing. They laughed almost always. It was so easy and good for the two of them, and their friendship gradually grew into something more. This delightful feeling, budding somewhere deep inside, made his heart flutter sweetly at every casual touch, and at the first timid kiss, frantically pounding, almost jumping out of his chest. Nicholas remembered the day when Cassandra, completely confused and depressed, had laid out a pile of pregnancy tests in front of her lover, each with an unchanging pair of stripes on it. That day had finally put everything in place in their relationship. "Cassandra, I love you and I want you to be with me always," the boy said firmly. Now it was up to her. What was there to think about? Of course, she had fans before, but as a rule they were narcissistic majors, burners of rich parents' money. Yes, they invited to expensive restaurants, could give gifts every day, but with none of them she did not feel real, as it is. Not one of them could just wander barefoot on the edge of the forest. None of them could give the whole world the way Nicholas did every day. What else was there to think about? Between the young people, everything was decided finally and irrevocably. Except that their father didn't approve of their decision. Nicholas was somewhat nervous. To bring Cassandra into his cell, of course, was impossible. He couldn't afford to rent a good flat. As luck would have it, an acquaintance of his had a tiny flat in a shabby old two-story building on the outskirts of the city. The neighborhood, of course, was not the most prosperous, but what can you do? Cassandra had made her choice, and it would take some getting used to. The important thing is that it's just the two of them. They say it doesn't matter where, it matters who you're with. Cassandra stepped over the threshold and looked round her new home with a wary eye. The room had not been renovated in at least 25 years, with old yellow wallpaper on the walls, a clunky old floor lamp next to a long sofa, a desk, and a cupboard with warped doors. It's also clearly not been slept in for a couple of years. There's a thick layer of dust all around, and bunches of spider webs hanging from the ceiling. And through the dirty windows it looked like fog. Nicholas watched Cassandra's gaze carefully. He was very afraid of her reaction. After all, the girl was understandable. She only had a wardrobe almost as big as this entire flat. She'd probably never seen such a mess. Inwardly, he was ready for her outrage. But Cassandra surprised the young man. She smiled adoringly at him and went to find a bucket and a rag. Nicholas exhaled with relief. No, he was not mistaken in this woman. She is not easy to break, and therefore, no circumstances will not separate them now. Together they will overcome any difficulties and obstacles. And for the sake of his beloved, he is ready to do anything, even work day and night. Cassandra even found the hassle of cleaning to be entertaining. Gradually, the dirty, abandoned flat turned into a cozy, warm nest. Sunlight finally streamed in through the washed and sparkling windows, and it became much easier and brighter on the soul. The future was no longer frightening with its uncertainty, as it had been before. Daddy used to say in such situations, "Fear has great eyes," the girl thought. The girl continued to work in one of the branches of her father's bank, but she was already looking for a suitable position elsewhere. In order to save money, she had to take a shuttle bus. Only the appearance of people who walked her to the bus stop every day was alarming. trying to do it discreetly, but the observant girl could not be fooled. The situation was tense. And there was no telling how it would have ended if one day Cassandra hadn't noticed the familiar figure of a giant in a gray suit slowly following her. It was Alex, her father's head of security. Surveillance, the girl's mind raced. This is new. Dad's completely out of control. The plan matured instantly, like a seasoned spy in an episode of some film. Cassandra rounded the corner and stopped, waiting for her awkward stalker. Alex didn't expect such a trick and got caught like a boy, meeting nose to nose with the object of his task. He stopped like a stumbling block and smiled embarrassedly, realizing that he had blundered. It was foolish to deny the obvious. "Cassandra, good afternoon," he said in a conciliatory tone, trying not to look her in the eye. "Alex, what kind of circus is this?" The girl was indignant. "We have known each other for 1,000 years. If you need to know the route of my traveling, just ask. I'm not hiding anything." The one in response to a quite fair protest only sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Miss Cassandra. It's the job. Just had orders to keep an eye on your boyfriend and you. Just to keep an eye on you, so God forbid anything bad happens." "Watch Nicholas for what?" the girl wondered. The man shrugged his shoulders perplexedly. "I don't know myself. He doesn't arouse any suspicion." Such terms of surveillance upset Cassandra. And why did Papa have such a grudge against her fiancé? What did he suspect him of? A phrase from the guard interrupted her musings. "By the way, Mr. Kevin was very anxious to meet and speak to you privately." Remembering her father's recent scandal, Cassandra flared up and exclaimed sharply, "I've already heard enough from him the last time we met. Enough. No more desire." Alex paced nervously and crumpled in place, but still continued to gently insist. "Cassandra, your dad hasn't been looking well lately. Can't find a place to be. He's been resenting himself because of your departure, but his pride won't allow him to admit his delusion openly. You know him." "Yes." Cassandra knew. Her father hated situations where he was wrong, and he hated to lose. The girl sighed. Lucky she hadn't inherited his phenomenal stubbornness. Her heart ached with an accumulated feeling of pity for her father. After all, he himself is tormented with his difficult character. Who better to help him than his own daughter? "All right, Alex. Tell Mr. Kevin I'll meet him at the restaurant." Her father had chosen their special place. He'd brought her here as a little girl, gallantly helping her to a table by the window and letting her order for two as an adult. She remembered with great excitement at the serious mission entrusted to her, reading aloud the names of the dishes to the waiter. Yes, it was a wonderful memory from a distant happy childhood. Her father was already waiting at that very table. His scowl and gray face were very disturbing. Only now the young woman noticed how much he had aged in recent years. Her heart clenched with anxiety and unbearable sadness. Seeing her daughter, Mr. Kevin stood up, smiling guiltily. That smile was enough for Cassandra. She realized that she would not hear words of repentance from him, and had long since resigned herself to that fact, but she was wrong. "Cassandra, I'm sorry, daughter, I've done something rash," he murmured quietly, looking down at the floor. "Daddy, what's wrong?" The girl was not in the least alarmed. "I've never heard a word of apology from your lips." He sighed, and, still trying not to look her in the eye, said, "There are reasons for that, but let's talk about it in order. Right now I want to tell you a cautionary tale. A long time ago, when Cassandra had just been born, the young enterprising Mr. Kevin and his mate Alex had decided to venture into the fledgling financial services market. They contributed equal shares and founded a new bank. It was not easy to organize the business process, but with an economic education and a great desire in their hearts, the two new bankers coped with this task. Things went quite well. They would live and be happy, if it were not for one but. Suddenly Alex had a problem. The echoes of the turbulent 90s times, when money and blood poured in a single turbulent river in the course of life's confusion and lawlessness, some obscure, suspicious people began to pursue and threaten Mr. Kevin's friend. Surprisingly, Alex did not react in any way to the dangerous situation, only braved and waved away the suggestion of his business partner to go to the police. "It's nothing to worry about. If they get tired of threatening, they will disappear from sight." The main thing is not to be afraid and not to give in to blackmail. These are not the same times as before. But the frivolous idea of simply abstracting from the problems turned out to be wrong and ended in a terrible tragedy. One day, in the middle of the day, on a deserted stretch of motorway, the car in which Alex was traveling with his wife was shot by bandits from automatic weapons and then fled in an unknown direction. The criminals were never found. The dead couple had no close relatives, and therefore their only 2-year-old son was left all alone in the world. Mr. Kevin was suddenly burdened with a heavy burden of responsibility and immediate resolution of some sensitive issues. For several nights, the man spent almost without sleeping a wink, pondering over the dilemma of what to do with the unfortunate boy. His conscience was incessantly tormented, convincing him that the right thing to do would be to adopt the son of his dead comrade and partner. But the opportunity to take the other half of the business and no longer need anything tempted and did not give rest. The man faced a difficult moral choice. In the end, consoling himself with the thought that the criminals could continue to hunt the descendants of the dead Alex, and it could bring trouble to his own family, he decided that the baby would be better and safer within the walls of the orphanage. The idea that he was saving his own family, his wife and daughter, warmed him for years. After that, drowning out the inner voice and the torment of conscience, the last name of Mr. Kevin's former business partner was Smith, and his son, disinherited and doomed to live in an orphanage, was called Nicholas. This was the story of his life as told in the restaurant by his father to Cassandra. "Dad, how could you?" came out of the mouth of his daughter, dumbfounded by this story. The man looked sadly at Cassandra. "If you knew how hard that decision was for me. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing." The girl still couldn't believe what she was hearing. Wrapping her arms around her head, she stared incredulously into her father's face with eyes widened with amazement. "But why did you tell me about it in the first place? You could have continued to keep that secret." Mr. Kevin sighed heavily and gently took her palms in his hands. "You are still too young, daughter. It is only with years and experience that one realizes that every decision or action one makes has to pay for it sooner or later. The intricacies of fate are amazing. Do you see what happened to me?" He grinned sadly. "Years ago, I betrayed my comrade, condemned his son to a life of poverty. And now, as if in mockery, the path of life brings my only daughter together with him." "Daddy," the daughter said quietly, "it's not too late to make things right. Maybe bringing Nicholas into your life is a chance for redemption." "Yes, of course it's necessary to correct mistakes," the father agreed. "But that's not the way it's decided here anymore," the man said cryptically and swallowed the prickly lump in his throat with difficulty. "The thing is, Cassandra, I don't have long to live. I'm sick, and the doctors give me no more than 2 or 3 years. That's the payback." "How so?" Large tears rolled down her cheeks from the maiden's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The father stood up and hugged his crying daughter tightly. "And I only recently found out myself, my dear. What can you do? The only thing to do is to accept it and live the rest of your life with dignity." The girl ducked into her father's shoulder and sobbed sorrowfully. The man gently ran his hand through her silky hair. "Just like Mum when she was a baby." "Don't cry, Cassandra," said the father. "Perhaps I may yet have time to lead you to the crown." "Daddy," she suddenly recovered herself, raising her weeping eyes to her father. "I never had time to tell you last time. I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather." The man sighed and pulled her even tighter against him. "Well, I'd like to meet your Nicholas. We have a lot to talk about." At the taxi car, they stood in silence for a few more minutes, just hugging each other as they had then, after Mum's death, 2 loved ones whom nothing and no one could quarrel or separate. "Go, darling," the father whispered goodbye, and then smiled some more and kissed his daughter affectionately on the forehead. "I expect to see you and Nicholas tomorrow night for a family dinner. Please don't be late." Cassandra's heart pinched for some reason at the parting tone of his voice. She hugged her father once more and, making an effort, got into the car. But tomorrow never came for Mr. Kevin. In the morning, Marion called with tears in her voice to tell her the terrible news. Her father had died during the night of a heart attack. Cassandra froze with the phone in her hand. She had spent all last night chasing away the strange premonition that their meeting would be the last. Marian had organized a lavish and solemn funeral. The widow herself looked out of place spectacularly, in a black lace dress with wide floors, a stylish hat and huge sunglasses. She gladly accepted condolences like a famous actress, waving away a mourning fan. She loudly thanked those who came to see the deceased off. From the outside, it might even have looked like she was at a social event. Cassandra and Nicholas stood a little further away. She was quiet. Her stepmother's behavior angered her, and she didn't want to talk to anyone, only to lean on her beloved's shoulder. She looked sadly at the lifeless body of her beloved. In the soul there was a complete emptiness, only a feeling of regret for the irretrievably lost time that could have been spent with her father. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she spoke to him mentally. "I had so much more to tell you. How much I love you, how grateful I am for everything. I'm sorry." After crying for a while longer, Cassandra wiped her tears away and decided it was time to pull herself together. She couldn't let the family business go under and let the bank, her father's life's work, collapse under the weight of life's circumstances. Cassandra knew for a fact that her father wanted her to run his business, and had always prepared her for the responsibility. But she was in for an unpleasant surprise. Marian suddenly announced that she found in the safe a second will, in which the father transferred every penny in the hands of his lawful wife. The daughter's name was not even mentioned. There could be no doubt. The document was genuine, and the solicitor confirmed the authenticity of Mr. Kevin's signature. But how is that possible? When did he have time to make such a will? Why did he remove his daughter from the business? And what will happen to the bank now? There were no answers to all these questions. At a loss, Cassandra turned to Alex, the head of security, hoping that he would shed some light on the confusing situation, because Dad trusted him immensely. He hesitated, biting his lip, but then made up his mind. "Well, I guess it's safe to say now, Mr. Kevin and his wife have been living like cats and dogs for the last month. I've even heard him say divorce a couple of times. I can't imagine how such a will could have been made. It's all strange and suspicious." This information made me feel even heavier. But what can you do? The law is the law. It is necessary to slowly take their things from their native home, which has now become a stranger. From the conversation on the phone, it turned out that Marian had gone to the beauty parlor for the day. "You can come back tonight to get your things," she threw straight into the receiver in a satisfied voice. "No way," Cassandra thought. "I don't have time to wait for you from the salon." The front door was opened by an elderly maid, Mrs. Megan, who had known Cassandra since she was a little girl. "Cassandra, darling, come in," she exclaimed cheerfully. "Won't the landlady scold you?" joked the girl. The lady wrinkled her nose, making it clear exactly how she felt about Marian, and let the late master's daughter into the house. The room was peaceful and tranquil. Everything lay in its proper place. For a little while it seemed to the girl that she had gone back in time, and outside this room nothing had changed either. In a few moments Dad would knock on the door and call her to the dining room for lunch or to the courtyard to play badminton. Cassandra sat down in the chair. Memories came flooding back. The noisy children's parties her father had organized for his beloved daughter on her birthday, or the usual quiet evenings when the head of the family was in his office, sitting at his massive desk, checking the bank's statistics on his computer, and Cassandra was allowed to sneak in quietly and sit in the corner of the sofa with a book in her hands. From time to time she would interrupt her reading and watch the man's tense face, watching the wrinkles between his eyebrows. When she caught her gaze, Dad turned his head and winked cheerfully. Those were the warmest and coziest moments. It is from them that the feeling of happiness is formed. Only not everyone knows how to notice them. People fidget restlessly in search of it, and it is here, very near. You just have to stop and look closely. A sad sigh escaped from his chest, and a tear slipped down his cheek. I wanted to go into my father's office, to breathe in one last breath of the painfully familiar smell that still lingered in the atmosphere of the house. Soon everything would change here. But the office door was locked, An unpleasant chill ran down my spine. My father never locked it in a house where everyone was his own. It was unacceptable. But the next door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. It was Marion's private room, which she so pathetically called the boudoir. Some unknown force pushed the girl forward. Her feet crossed the threshold and carried her inside. This was the first time she had ever been here. A pungent smell of some sweet perfume hit her nose. A glance along the walls revealed countless handbags and pairs of shoes of various shapes and colors. At the mirror, thousands of tubes, boxes, and jars of expensive cosmetics. There was also a mobile stand with some incredible outfits, responding with sequins and rhinestones. The whole atmosphere of the room resembled the dressing room of a famous entertainer. Daddy's inheritance won't last long enough for Marion, Cassandra thought and grinned bitterly. Her attention was drawn to a small table in the very corner of the room. An intricately shaped object was covered by a handkerchief. Cassandra tugged the light cloth in one motion, and an unprecedented apparatus with a built-in mechanical arm and a biro in the middle appeared before her. Looking closer, she realized that she had seen similar devices in a picture from a Chinese advertisement. It was a handwritten printer that could copy and reproduce any handwritten text, including a person's signature. An incomplete box of medicine was lying next to it. Leaning closer, the girl read the name on the label. Suddenly something clicked in her memory. An information from a detective story she had read recently, where the protagonist was poisoned with the help of just such a drug, came to mind. Its effect could easily be confused with a heart attack. Cassandra shuddered at the horrifying guess, and then a fever came on. Her chest constricted, preventing her from taking another breath of air, and her eyes darkened. A terrible thought pounded in my temples. Hastily saying goodbye to Mrs. Megan and sliding into the driver's seat of her red sedan, she immediately dialed Alex's phone number. Only her late father's loyal security guard and good mate could help in such an unlikely situation. "I need to speak to you urgently," she tossed into the receiver instead of a greeting. From her trembling voice, he immediately guessed that something extraordinary had happened. "Come to my office, Cassandra. I'll be waiting for you," he replied anxiously. After listening attentively to the story of Cassandra's amazing findings, the man thought, pacing restlessly around the office. There was much to marvel at. He'd seen a lot of things in his life, especially in his younger days, as a law enforcement officer. Wives and husbands, distant relatives are willing to do anything for material gain. But you have to prove the crime, and that's much more difficult than pressing charges. "It's a good thing you left everything in place, and didn't say anything to anyone but me," he praised Cassandra, and added, "I guess we'll have to go to my fellow police colonel. He'll tell us what to do and help us sort this thing out within the law." And so it was agreed. The cemetery keeper, a gaunt old man with a wrinkled face, waved his hand in the direction of an overgrown shrubby grave. "There they are, the Smiths. They put up a communal monument 20 years ago, and nobody ever came round again," he complained. "I clean up sometimes, but I don't have the energy for all the abandoned graves anymore." With these words, the gray-haired old man turned around and slowly walked back to the gatehouse, leaving the young man with a huge bouquet of flowers in his hands alone. "People often come here to talk to the dead, and they should not be disturbed." A very young man and woman looked at Nicholas with a smile from their long, faded portraits. He struggled to suppress a nervous shiver in his knees and stepped closer. There they were, the father, dark-haired and thin, confused by his past, for which he had paid a heavy price, and the mother, a round-faced, blue-eyed blonde, a real beauty, who had been the innocent victim of a crime because of her husband's carelessness. Nicholas closed his eyes and shook his head, trying to push those dark thoughts away. There was no telling what had really happened, and no one knew for sure who was to blame. And even he, the son of those who had died at the hands of bandits, had no right to judge and condemn his parents. He himself once almost stumbled in his life. Who knows how his fate would have turned out then? It's easy to make mistakes, very easy. "Hello, Mum and Dad," he said out loud and immediately felt awkward. Well, how could one talk to a rock? From the outside, it might look like he was insane. This thought made him look around, but there wasn't a soul around. only the lonely voice of a bird hidden in the dense crown of a huge tree, and the rustling of the leaves of the young birches growing nearby could be heard. Nicholas turned and continued to look at his parents' faces in the photographs. The strange feeling that every minute they seemed more and more dear to him seized the young man. Perhaps it was a simple play of light or his own imagination, but their smiles became sad or, on the contrary, singing, as if they wanted to say something. "How good it is to see you, son," said the father's calm, clear gaze, and the mother's eyes shone with happiness. "Nicholas, thank God you are well. I love you, my son. Don't forget to visit us once in a while." An absolutely incredible thought pierced through the young man's brain. God, they are alive. Alive in my head. Alive as long as I think of them. A light breeze playfully ruffled his hair, as if someone's loving hand had caressed his head for a correct guess, and the birches nodded their heads merrily. Right. That's right." A huge, all-consuming wave of emotion suddenly came and covered the boy with his head. His heart clenched in his chest, and his legs shook helplessly. He fell to his knees, covered his face with his palms, and bent over the graves. "Mummy, Daddy, I love you so much. How I miss you." For the first time in years, he cried. The last time he had given a faint, Nicholas remembered well. He had shattered his knee when he was 5 years old, and the older boys had made fun of him and bullied him in every way possible. Ever since then, he'd sworn he'd never, ever show his vulnerability to anyone. But now was a different story. From somewhere inside, from the hidden depths, a pain, not physical but mental, was bursting out with stingy masculine tears. Nicholas took a deep breath and felt that some kind of clamp, a spasm in his chest, stiffening him for the last few years, suddenly disappeared without a trace. It was even easier to breathe. Looking around, he headed for the gatehouse to ask the old man for some cleaning supplies. It's not good to leave graves in this condition. A good 2 hours passed in cleaning. Someone's thin voice from behind him tore Nicholas away from the task. "Excuse me, can I take the candy?" A skinny little girl of about 10 in an old dress stood next to him. "Take it, of course," the boy replied and stepped aside. The girl dutifully gathered the sweets into the bag, which was already half full, and looked curiously at the monument. "Is that your mom and dad?" she inquired in a perfectly direct tone. "Yes, those are my parents," the lad confirmed, glanced again at the stranger's shoddy attire, and asked, "And where are yours?" "Yeah," she shrugged uncertainly. "I don't know, I've never seen them. I've been in an orphanage all my life," the girl explained. Over there on the hillside, she waved her hand, showing where she'd come from. Nicholas nodded at the bag in her hands and asked with a smile, "You'll get a toothache from so many sweets, it's a bit much." She only laughed in response. "Well, I'm not alone. We have only 40 kids." Nicholas's mind flashed back to his childhood, a joyless childhood. Everything on a schedule, food bland and tasteless, candy only on holidays. No wonder the children run away and hang around the cemetery to sweeten their existence. The girl turned around and walked towards the exit. Only now the boy noticed that she limped heavily and huffed on her leg. It seemed to be a consequence of birth trauma. "And what's your name, benefactor?" he called out to her. She glanced up and answered cheerfully, "I'm Alice." The slim, limping orphan, caring for the younger ones, did not get out of Nicholas's mind. In her fathomless eyes, he saw his own childhood pain, scarred in his heart forever. Children can be very cruel. He knew that from his own experience. Maybe this girl, who has been lame since childhood, is being bullied by her peers at the orphanage. That's why she takes care of kids who are much kinder and not yet able to divide people into castes. Cassandra listened with interest to the story of the trip to the cemetery where Nicholas' parents were buried and the touching acquaintance with the orphan. She once again surprised her husband. "Let's go to that orphanage next weekend, bring sweets and presents there, and meet Alice." The young man hugged his spouse. Although they had signed recently quietly, it seemed to him that he had known her all his life. But still, time after time, he discovered more and more of her virtues. Like a precious stone, She opened to him previously unknown facets, striking him with the brilliance and beauty of her soul. Looking into her clear, lively eyes, he marveled at the amazing inner strength that lurked in that fragile body. "Cassandra, you are my dear. How well you understand me. Thank you, my love." "Are you going back to work?" she asked with regret in her voice, noticing that her spouse was off somewhere again. "It's Sunday." Thoth crouched down beside her and patiently clarified. "Cassandra, you realize my new job requires constant supervision. I promise I'll be back early today," he added, and kissed her gently goodbye. Spoken just like Daddy, just like he used to say, flashed through the young woman's mind. Just recently, Nicholas had had a stroke of luck. The owners of the service station where he had worked for the last few years decided to move permanently to another country and agreed to rent their property cheaply to the most promising employee. Nicholas was passionate about the idea. He knew everything here well and knew how to do a lot of things. From the very first independent steps in this business, he found an entrepreneurial spirit. Things went even better than ever. The customer flow had increased. Even Harry had to hire a few helpers in his tiny cafe to keep up with the guests. Of course, they saw each other less often now, but such enthusiasm for their favorite business was a source of satisfaction for Cassandra. Everyone has the right to realize their abilities for the good of society. Nicholas, for example, helps to fix cars, and without them in the crazy rhythm of the modern world is impossible. Hundreds of burning children's eyes glared with admiration and curiosity at the two newly arrived visitors in the boxes of toys, books, and sweets surrounding their car. More and more children ran towards them, forming a crowd buzzing with anticipation like a swarm of bees. The headmistress of the orphanage ran excitedly around the sponsors, repeating words of gratitude. Nicholas looked for a familiar face in the crowd of children and waved his hand. "Alice, why don't you say hello? Don't you recognize me? I brought candy for the kids, and not just any candy." The children looked round in surprise and parted. The girl, blushing with embarrassment, slumped over on her side and came closer. "I remember you well," she said in a voice trembling with excitement. "I even brought flowers to your papa and mama. Daisies from the field so they'd be pretty." These words made Nicholas's heart squeeze. Good little man. How I wished the system and society had not succeeded in breaking this wonderful, delicate mental organization, as it often happens. On the contrary, it would be lucky to preserve and nurture the sprouts of immense kindness and craving for beauty. Yes, such people have a harder life than others, but they are the only hope for the preservation of humanity in this mad, cruel world, Nicholas thought. "Meet Alice. This is Cassandra, my wife," the man said, and gently nudged the hesitant orphan closer to his wife. The girl shook the hand extended for greeting, and staring at the young woman's rounded belly, exclaimed with childlike directness, "Oh, you will soon have a baby." The parents to be laughed and nodded merrily. "How I love little ones." Alice smiled and even clasped her hands together, showing her imaginary baby. Her eyes shone with happiness. At that moment, looking into them, one could see a whole universe. There was unconditional, all-encompassing love for everything and everyone, and forgiveness for past offenses, which only sinless, childish souls are capable of. There was also a small, bright star of hope. Marion's behavior at the court hearing was completely outrageous. She was screaming and cursing at Cassandra, or laughing hysterically. Perhaps she was belatedly trying to feign madness, wanting to avoid responsibility for her horrible crimes. Or maybe she had simply given up trying to be a lady of high society, showing her true nature. But her behavior had had the opposite effect. No one present felt the slightest sympathy or pity for the defendant. Without a single emotion on her face, Cassandra watched her stepmother's disgusting display. The big picture from the mosaic of previous events could now be fully assembled. After the scandal with her father, Marion had pieced together the torn document and decided that she was worthy of most of the inheritance. Declaring her claim to her husband in a disgruntled tone, she was met with an aggressive rejection. Mr. Kevin, still emotional after the departure of his daughter, for the first time in all the years expressed to his wife all the claims, and they accumulated a lot. Because of absolute selfishness, because of the unwillingness to have a child, because of mindless spending millions on clothes and trinkets. That's when, holding a grudge in her soul, the woman came up with a plan to get rid of a strict husband and from the annoying stepdaughter in one fell swoop. Of course, alone with her limited mind, she could not cope with such a task. With the help of an accomplice, as it turned out later lover, Marion bought potent drugs and put them in the food unsuspecting spouse. The same accomplice suggested how to forge a will. Now he had to sit next to her in the dock. The evidence of cold-blooded murder and forgery was clear. Justice had been done, and the guilty were punished. This, of course, pleased Cassandra, but the man she loved could not be returned. The nervous and physical strain of the last few months had taken its toll on the young woman who carried a child under her heart. Walking out of the courtroom after the verdict, Cassandra suddenly bent down and grabbed her stomach with her hand in fright. "What's wrong?" Agitatedly, her husband rushed to her. "A doctor," she whispered with whitened lips. As luck would have it, an ambulance arrived just minutes later, but Cassandra still had to be hospitalized. In the corridor of the hospital, Nicholas could not find a place and wandered from end to end, seeing the medics walking past him with a confused look of concern. Worry and anxiety in his soul were replaced by anguish. And why did they go to the last court session? It was clear enough as it was. And yet Cassandra was still worried. God, I wish everything would be all right. A short, elderly female doctor with thick lensed glasses came out to the daddy-to-be, interrupting his self-torture. "Your wife's condition has normalized, but the threat of pregnancy failure remains. I'm afraid she will have to stay with us under medical supervision until she gives birth." Saddened by this news, Cassandra sighed heavily the whole time. God, this is so bad timing. There's so much unfinished business with the inheritance in the bank. Alice, poor girl, she's waiting for us and trusting us. And I'm just forced to lie here and stare at the ceiling. "Cassandra, don't be silly," Nicholas said in a stern tone. "Your only and most important thing right now is to think about your health. And the baby can't be risked. There is a manager at the bank. Some of the paperwork I will be able to arrange. Don't worry," he reassured her. "Everything will be fine." The woman gently squeezed her husband's hand in her palm and looked at him pityingly. "Oh, you're at work most of the time as it is. Why don't you leave her? We don't need anything now, do we?" "Why, dear?" He smiled affectionately. "I promised your father I'd earn my own money. You'll have to work hard for the business for now." Cassandra looked at her lover with a chuckle. How he reminded her of her father at that moment. Just as caring, balanced and calm, but at the same time stubborn, insisting on his point of view. How she loved him. How lucky she is to have met him. Cassandra and little Kevin, her husband, came to pick up Alice. The little girl looked at her little brother with delight and smiled. She couldn't help it. Her lips were smiling with happiness. "He is so small," she whispered softly, with a gasp, looking at the doll's nose and tiny lips of the sleeping baby. The young parents looked at them with a quiet smile, thinking almost the same thing. Here they are, small particles of a huge world, the hope for a bright future. A girl with a huge heart and a boy, a blank sheet on which to write and write. A lot depends on Cassandra and Nicholas and the fate of these children. Their task is to sow in their minds the seed of generosity and kindness. But the whole difficulty lies in the fact that it is impossible to teach this simply by textbooks and books, only by their own example, because children always repeat the line of behavior of their parents, who by their personal example, in fact, help them to create their own way of life. Everyone writes the destiny of mankind on a small area of responsibility in a global sense. That is why it is a huge responsibility and an honorable mission to be a mom and dad. Edward slowly drove out of the office parking lot and headed towards the center. The businessman's car maneuvered confidently between the rows of cars, the owners of which in about 10 or 20 minutes would quite expectedly hit rush hour, tuning the radio to his favorite wave. Edward Reynolds wondered how his son Volan was doing. Was Stacy doing well? It's tough. 7 years in the same wheelchair, and why should the little one have to go through such an ordeal? Tears glistened in the corners of the businessman's eyes. The recent conversation with Jacob, the pediatric orthopedist, came to mind. What can I say, Edward? I've examined Voland, and I'll tell you this, I found no abnormalities. You see, I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, your son's ailment is not physical, but rather psychological. So Voland has no injuries or trauma. Will he be able to walk as he used to? Edward asked hopefully. The doctor furrowed his brow, trying to find the right words for the businessman. Depends on what you mean by the word injury. Of course, as such in terms of the physical, your son doesn't have one. But the psyche is a special thing, little studied. As they say, nothing is certain. No, don't be frightened, of course. Your son will overcome the disease and get back on his feet. But it's very, very, very early to talk about any specific time frame. Edward sighed sadly. Jacob had given him hope, and then he'd taken it away. Now, as he thought back to the conversation with the doctor, Edward could barely contain the despair that was gripping him. Wolin's mother had died when he was 2 years old. The boy barely remembered her and had only seen her in photographs. 8 months ago, his stepmother appeared in his life. Edward lived alone for about 5 years, devoting himself completely to his son. But when that terrible robbery happened and Volin stopped walking, he realized that they couldn't go anywhere without a woman's hand. The only problem for Edward was choosing medical personnel for his son, simply put, a nurse. Volin had the temperament of his late grandfather, and it was very difficult to please him. All Edward could hear was, "Dad, don't take offense, but Vicky's no good for me. She won't read books, and she sits on her phone all day. She's even worse than the last auntie, but she plays with me. It's true, she does it by force. But I can feel her eyes are lifeless, like she's a robot." Like something out of a space movie, Edward's heart clenched in pity. What could be easier than finding a caregiver for a little boy? But in reality, it was a lottery of one way or the other. Stacy had tried too. No luck. And she needs a new nurse. But where do we find one? Everyone's used to a nurse taking care of a bedridden patient. And here's a boy who can't walk, but has a lot of energy. That's where the difficulties arise. The businessman thought on his way home and decided to stop at the store. Edward pulled into the parking lot in front of the supermarket. He knew that Stacy didn't like going to grocery stores, so he'd taken on that responsibility recently. Business partner Jonathan only chuckled when he found Eddie's fiancée. "First time I've ever seen a man think about what to make for dinner. What's your job? To provide for your family. To have something to buy bread with, preferably with butter. The rest is up to her." Edward blushed at such remarks and tried to turn the conversation to another direction as quickly as possible. For him, growing up in the countryside, going to the store was no big deal. The most important thing was to have something to go to the store with, and the rest was nothing. When he entered the supermarket, Edward picked up his basket and headed for the freshly baked goods section. Wolin loved sweets, and he tried to spoil him from time to time. Fresh cinnamon buns, pies with cherries, pears, jam, and more. His eyes widened. Suddenly, Edward's attention was drawn to the sound of Penelope. It was coming from the neighboring convenience store. "Help, somebody. There's a man down here. Call an ambulance, please." Edward flinched and reached for his pocket, forgetting that he'd left his smartphone in the car. "Hey, for fuck's sake. Okay, gotta see what's what." Maybe some other help is needed when the businessman walked into the neighboring department. A sad picture unfolded before his eyes. An elderly man, a pensioner, lay on his back with no outward signs of life. Nearby, a basket with a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a couple of packs of breadcrumbs, which had toppled over during the fall, was lying orphaned. The people surrounding the man stood around, unsure of what to do next. Or maybe he's just drunk, put forward one of the eyewitnesses a completely ridiculous hypothesis. "What are you, a man?" Ivan is intelligent and clutched at his heart. "I saw him. I was standing about 5 meters away from him," objected a woman. Suddenly, someone pulled Edward aside and squeezed his way to the center of the circle of people that had formed. "Disperse, please. Allow me," came a pleasant female voice. The businessman shifted his gaze to the stranger who had volunteered to help and literally froze on the spot with amazement. It was a real tramp. No, not dirty, of course. And no odor of alcohol or cigarettes. But the clothes and shoes left a lot to be desired. Plus an old, worn-out Penelope cloak. But the main thing was not even in this, but in the fact that, kneeling down, this stranger about 30 years old began to do Grandpa indirect heart massage. Everyone gasped in surprise, as if they wanted to do the same thing before, but just did not have time. And that's when the unwitting spectators of the unfolding drama went and began to fuss around, trying to help. Someone dialed the number of the ambulance. Someone gave advice, valuable and not so valuable. However, the woman did everything as it should be done, and the confirmation of this was a quiet wheeze from the chest of a man lying on the floor. "Thank God, alive," ran through the crowd. Just as the ambulance arrived, The paramedics rushing to the scene entered the supermarket lobby. The tramp disappeared into the crowd and was about to disappear when Edward touched her arm. "Oh, wait, don't go. Would you like a ride?" The woman looked ironically at the respectable businessman standing in front of her. "You will. And why?" "I don't think you want to ask me out. Then what's this all about?" "I'm not too far away, so thank you, but I'll pass." Edward blushed embarrassed, but he didn't back down. "I'm sorry, I may have misspoken. You see, or rather my son needs help." She shook her head. "And how can I help you?" "I'm not a medical professional, not right now anyway. And children require special treatment. No, I'm not the right person for you." Edward turned dark. The flame of hope was slowly fading, sinking more and more into the abyss of sadness. Suddenly, as if remembering something, the businessman reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. "Here, look. This is my son Voland. He is 7. He can't walk, though he's not disabled, but he really needs help. Maybe you'll do it?" The stranger took the picture carefully, and her hands trembled. "My God, he's so small. Why did he have to go through all this?" Edward could feel her hesitating as she looked at him. In truth, he didn't know the real reason for his choice. It was reckless, to say the least, to invite a man from the street into the house. On the other hand, the way the stranger had rescued the elderly customer deserved respect, for not everyone had such specific skills. "My name is Edward. Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you, and I'll pay you generously for my services. At least give it a try. If it doesn't work out, I won't consider you an enemy or a bad person. You can live in our house. There's plenty of room for everyone." "I don't even think about it," Edward said again. "I'm Stacy Smirnoff." He looked at her hopefully. "So you agree? Am I getting this right?" Stacy smiled for the first time since they'd met. "I do. Where can I get away from you? But I'm not making any promises. After all, I've hardly ever worked with children, but before, I mean. In a previous life." Edward nodded, and then invited her to the car. He didn't feel like shopping today, especially after what had happened at the store. On the way to her employer's house, Stacy behaved modestly, keeping quiet, glancing out the window occasionally. Edward didn't ask any questions, realizing that his new acquaintance needed time to settle in. As she sat in the front seat of the huge SUV, Stacy literally disappeared into it, becoming almost invisible and very small. Edward winked at her and sped up. The businessman drove the car confidently, expertly. Stacy relaxed and drifted off to sleep. Fortunately, it wasn't a long drive, and soon Edward's house was in sight. Or rather, his late wife Vivi's, to be precise, and Edward valued precision above all else. "Here we are. Oh, I forgot to tell you, for the sake of convenience, I'd like to use you without any patronymics and so on. I'm a simple man from the village. It's easier for me," Edward said, pulling the car in front of the house. Stacy nodded in embarrassment and opened the door, leaving the cozy interior of the SUV. It was early fall, and a sharp gust of wind made her body shiver. As the sun set, it was getting quite chilly. The guests' clothes were, to put it mildly, inappropriate for the season. Edward realized that and headed for the door to go inside, but Stacy was already at the door. "What are you doing out so late? I called you several times, but I couldn't get through." "Oh, we have company." "Oh, I see." Stacy glanced at Edward, but he shrugged to ease the awkwardness. The businessman asked, "Where is my favorite son? Why isn't he meeting his daddy?" Stacy pursed her lips in frustration. And Volan was in a bad mood again. He threw a construction set out the window. "Can you believe it?" That's not true. It wasn't like that at all." My son's voice came from the next room. "What was it like then?" "Tell Daddy don't be shy," Stacy snapped at him. "I didn't throw it away. I shared it with my friends. Their parents didn't have the money to buy one, so I threw it down from the window to the boys in a box. Let them play. I'm not sorry." Volan objected and left the room in his wheelchair. He shared. "How could he? You're such a smart ass. Have you thought how much money that purchase cost your father? When you start earning your own money, then you'll be able to manage your things." "But you don't work, Aunt Stacy." "But you do manage Daddy's money," Volan said, catching his stepmother off guard. Stacy coughed embarrassedly, signaling that she wasn't enjoying the family squabble. "Come on. I'll show you where your room is." Edward caught up and pointed down the long hallway. Volan gave Stacy a wary look and thought, well, another nurse. "I bet she'll be on the phone 24 hours a day. too. Stacy looked at her stepson with hatred, though in truth he had done nothing wrong. In spite of his young age, Voland had already developed his own opinions that were at odds with Stacy's. This often caused friction between the two of them. Only Edward could stop it. Stacy had prepared all sorts of goodies and delicacies for dinner. Stacy, as always, is on top of her game. What's with all this? We're not going to eat it anyway, Edward asked with a smile. I got carried away. It just came out of the blue. You know I like to cook, she said with pride in her voice. At the same time, she threw an angry glance at Voland. The boy obediently lowered his eyes and began picking at his salad with his fork. In fact, he knew very well that Stacy had not cooked anything and had purchased all this culinary splendor at a restaurant, ordering a dozen dishes for home delivery. Voland remembered well the time his stepmother had almost burned down the kitchen when she had tried to make him an omelet. Stacy had ended up handing him a package of instant noodles and recommending that he pour hot water over them. Of course, Edward didn't know about all of this, as his fiancée was very cunning and forward-thinking. Stacy sat silently at dinner, mentally berating herself for accepting the businessman's proposal. Stacy stared at her, unbidden, like a shopper picking things out at the market. What? You don't use that knife? Can't you eat with a fork? She tried to tease her guest. No, it's just more comfortable for me, Stacy said modestly. Stacy grinned, not noticing Voland's judgmental look. Frankly speaking, the boy did not like the behavior of his stepmother, who from the first minutes of their conversation began to pretend to be a queen. She's no better than Stacy herself, he thought. At least the guest is calm and doesn't ask questions like the other aunts who worked in the house. After dinner, everyone went to their rooms. Stacy had one now, though she preferred to go to Voland's room first. Hi, I'm Stacy. You probably already know this, but I'm your new nurse. I'm going to be your nurse from now on. The boy looked at her in disbelief. Just like that. And other aunts immediately tried to cure me, made me do gymnastics, called me lazy. They said I didn't want to help myself. Stacy shook her head sadly. No, why would I try to cure you if you didn't want me to? I'm right. It's easier for you, it's more familiar. Voland's indignation took his breath away. What are you talking about? I really want to, but I can't walk. I believe you. I believe you. But if you don't want to heal yourself, no one can help you get out of that wheelchair. Not even me. And you know everything. That's why you're so smart. You're just a nurse. Aren't you? Voland said uncertainly. But Stacy did not answer the question. She'd gotten the effect of her words so she could go to bed with a clear conscience. Edward caught up with her at the door to her room, holding a large bag. Here, take it. It's clothes, all new. They're my late wife Vivi's. She never even wore it. I never got around to throwing it away. Don't worry, it's only temporary. You seem to be the same size as her. I knew it right away. But please don't tell Stacy, or she'll be offended. Stacy was embarrassed. Edward suddenly appeared to her in a completely different light. It was as if he'd been standing there in total darkness, and the people around him could only guess at his appearance. Thank you very much. I'll wear them carefully, Stacy murmured softly, taking the bag. Edward went to his office to work on the month's reports. He'd been having a lot of trouble lately, although in the businessman's opinion he couldn't complain. Sitting down at his desk, he looked at Voland's picture in a flowery frame and thought about the times when his son had not had such health problems as he had now. And all this was the result of the trauma he had suffered, not physical but psychological. Edward blamed himself for what had happened. He'd been advised to equip the house with all sorts of sensors and surveillance cameras, hire a couple or 3 guards, finally get a wolfhound with a voice that would make passersby shake. But no, he relied on his good reputation in business circles. A high-profile robbery has put everything in its place, and subsequently led to irreparable consequences. No, Voland, none of the raiders did not offend, but the shock experienced by the boy during the robbery was so strong that his legs failed. Actually, the robbery itself was without casualties. Masked robbers knew perfectly well the location of rooms in the house and the owner's daily routine, so they quickly found the safes in Edward's study. What happened next was a matter of technique: the break-in, the shouts of joy, and the theft of a large sum of money. Little Voland stood in the corner and watched in horror as the black-masked men filled a bag with valuables and money. One of the raiders turned and jokingly threatened the boy with his finger. Voland pressed his back into the wall and covered his eyes with his palms. Schwer's Penelope maid could no longer help and idly watched her master being robbed. After surviving the raid, she quit the next day, leaving Edward alone with his problems. Voland withdrew into himself. lying on his bed for days at a time. The shock he had suffered caused him to develop partial paralysis of his lower limbs. At first, Edward thought that his son's ailment would pass rather quickly. Everyone has unpleasant memories in their lives, and it's okay they walk. If the businessman only knew how wrong he was. It is not surprising when there are so many counselors around, each of whom is so eager to make his own contribution. Don't worry, he'll be fine. The main thing is that the bones are intact, and everything else is not so important. The main thing for a boy is to have the right physique, to be tall and strong, and your Voland will be just like that. You'll see, you mark my word, Jonathan said. Edward nodded in agreement, trying to find the strength to believe what was causing him the greatest fear. Edward was used to being treated with condescension in business circles. It was as if the gods had come down from Olympus to bless a mere mortal. They say that he has made his way into the elite. Well done. It was about time he showed zeal. Edward knew that many envied him. A rich widower who got $1 million after his wife died in his will. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And Edward had taken it. He grabbed it by the tail, much to the dismay of the others. Virtually no one doubted that it was a marriage of convenience. What else could it be? When you marry the daughter of Jacob's richest man. But Edward himself was not a wealthy man. He married Vivi for love alone. And so that no one would think the guy had fallen for his rich bride's assets, he'd even agreed to sign a prenup. That's the right thing to do. That's the way it's done in our circle. No offense. No, but if the marriage is equal, it's different, you know. Everything is equal. You're not a Rothschild, Jacob said. Edward didn't take offense, he understood, and he didn't expect any different treatment. To everyone, he was just another capital hunter for his rich bride, a puppet in the hands of his father-in-law, who played his son-in-law like an experienced puppeteer. No one could even think that Edward cared about Vivi, not her dowry in a foreign bank, cars, luxury homes, and all the other tinsel that the rich of all ranks and colors so often bragged about. Unfortunately, in marriage they lived only 2 years, although before that they met for 3. And all because the father of the bride deliberately delayed the wedding, expecting that the young parted, and the problem will solve itself. What do I need this poor man for? Whose son is he? The tractor driver's son. His mother is unemployed. What kind of status is that? A housewife. What can she do for a housewife? Tip the cow's tails, Jacob was talking to his wife, who was Vivi's stepmother. Trixie looked at her husband ironically. She didn't want to judge Edward, nor did she want to get into an argument with him, so she preferred to stay neutral. It was better for herself and the people around her. At the time of the wedding, Edward was working as a management trainee in Jacob's office. He wasn't exactly a star in the sky. How could he? When he'd graduated from university only 6 months ago, and by correspondence, since he'd been working as a longshoreman to keep from starving in a city so foreign and hostile to him. No one could have guessed that it wouldn't be long before Edward would be the first violinist in the company. Oh, son, you seem to be making a big mistake. They'll ruin you, the rich people. Nothing is sacred to them. I can see the way they look at you. You're just a servant to them, Edward's mother said bitterly. But the boy did not give up and accepted all the trials with the proper humility, signed a marriage contract, according to which in case of divorce he received nothing. But Edward did not despair. He sincerely loved his wife, and when she gave him Voland, he began to love even more. The birth of his grandson melted the ice in Jacob's heart. His heartfelt conversations with his son-in-law were more and more often accompanied by warm notes. It was still a long way from complete harmony, but Edward didn't want it. Then Jacob's family was haunted by an evil fate. First, Jacob, the head of the company, fell gravely ill. Neither money, nor doctors, nor elite private clinics helped. Many said at the time that this was payback for the years of frenzied accumulation of initial capital, writer takeovers, not so legal schemes, and now the unshakable colossus had fallen, approaching ordinary mortals at arm's length. Deep down, Edward sympathized with his father-in-law and held no grudge. What was there to be angry about when he was the kind of man who couldn't be changed? Jacob was fading before his eyes. There was nothing the family could do. No folk healer, no fortune tellers, no expensive drugs from abroad helped. Trixie's wife stayed with him every step of the way, trying to ease his condition. But it was all in vain. Jacob was gone. 3 days before his 50th birthday, standing at his father-in-law's fresh grave. Edward didn't know that it would only be a year before the same fate would befall his wife. Her life had been cut short by bilateral pneumonia. It was freezing cold when she went skiing with her friends. Vivi always watched her figure and liked to give her body physical activity. That fateful day, Edward tried to dissuade her. Maybe another time would be better, Vivi. Really, such a drastic change. Yesterday it was 0, and today it's almost -20. but his wife immediately reassured him. "Don't worry, Edward, everything will be fine. It's not the first time I've done this. We have to seize the moment or summer will come. And then what? You know you have to act while you can. Well, you know best, of course. Just please be careful." Vivi hugged her husband lovingly. "I promise Penelope and I won't be long. We'll do a couple laps and then back." If only Edward had known where his wife's innocent amusement would lead. He would never have let her leave the house. That fateful morning, the three of them drove out of town in Vivi's car. The weather was clear and frosty, and there was no sign of trouble. But as soon as the car hit the bridge, the worst happened. Vivi had been distracted for a split second while answering a friend's question, which made her too late to notice the SUV crossing into the oncoming traffic lane. In an attempt to avoid the collision, Penelope swerved the steering wheel to the left and rammed into the bridge supports. The car plummeted into the ice-filled river. The impact was so strong that the mangled body of the car broke through the ice and plunged into the water about half. From afar, the car looked like a float that had lost its integrity and was filling with water. It was slowly going down. Penelope and Vivi began to scream loudly, smashing their palms against the windows. No one wanted to die at that age. Vivi was the first to come to her senses and, unlike her friends, began to squeeze out the windshield because there was a huge crack in it. When she succeeded, there was icy water under her feet. Looking at her friends, Vivi commanded, "Come on, what's the holdup? Hurry up before the car drowns." "Yes, of course," now Penelope whispered, shivering from the cold, and began to climb to the saving edge of the ice. Vivi followed. Vivi was the last to leave the sinking car, like a shipwrecked captain. Unfortunately, at that moment her clothes were soaked through and her body was already pierced by cold needles. Although the ambulance arrived relatively quickly, Vivi suffered severe frostbite, which later gave complications to her lungs. The doctors did everything they could, but medicine was powerless in such cases. With a high fever, Vivi was thrashing around in delirium and begged for a notary to be brought to her. "Honey, you don't have to. Why are you thinking about it? You're going to get better," Edward begged her. He sincerely believed this, because he rightly believed that money could do anything in a certain situation. "God, but it's not cancer." "Aren't there any more effective drugs?" Edward asked the head of the department, but he just shook his head. Vivi could feel herself fading away, and with each breath the life was slowly leaving her disease-ridden body. "Sweet Edward, I'm so sorry about this. Don't worry, I took care of everything. You and Volan won't need anything," Vivi wheezed, gathering the rest of her strength. "Oh, come on, what are you talking about? You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? I'll raise everyone's ears. We'll find a way out," Edward whispered without noticing the tears on his cheeks. But somewhere upstairs in heaven, the decision had already been made. Kneeling in front of his wife's bed, the young widower covered his face with his hands and sobbed. But why should he have all these cursed riches when his beloved is gone, and his heart is torn with pain? At the sight of this sad picture, the nurses turned pale and hurriedly passed by, and an elderly nurse even crossed herself as she came closer. "You cry, dear man. Some of the pain will come out with your tears, but don't give up. Live in such a way that your spouse will be proud of you. She's up there in heaven, seeing everything." Edward looked longingly at the nurse. "Thank you. But you don't need to comfort me. It still hurts a lot." She touched his arm sympathetically. "It hurts. Honey, do you have children?" "I do." "Then live for them. Children are our future. They are called the flowers of life for a reason. Only flowers bloom for one season, but babies, if you take care of them, are happy for a long time." To Edward's amazement, the elderly nurse's words had a favorable effect on him. There was something in them that made him pull himself together and think of his son, who was still so young that he didn't understand anything. The funeral and all the subsequent mourning took place like a dream for Edward. At the cemetery, standing by the fresh grave, the young widower realized that the rich cried too, but in their own way. But is he rich? It's not all his. The firm company shares elite real estate. And who is he? The son of a tractor driver from the village, who decided to try his luck in the big city. But his happiness was short-lived, and the price for it had to pay the highest, one that makes your head spin and your heart ache. Maybe it was all just a dream. Edward had to pinch his shoulder and everything would be back to normal. The village, the birds singing in the morning, and the smell of freshly cut grass. Water from the well, you drink it like nectar, but the cold makes your teeth chatter. But there was no smell of sleep here. All this was a harsh reality to the point of impossibility. At first, no one saw Edward as the heir to a vast empire. Everyone expected him to make a rash move, and like a house of cards, the whole thing would collapse, And if it did, they'd help him fall anyway. Sooner or later there would be someone to push him, as they say. But Edward not only held on, but also managed to prove that he was worthy of more than the representatives of the business elite gave him. The widower had to go through a lot before his name and surname became indicators of wealth and success. And while everything was going relatively well in business, in his family, on the contrary, problem after problem followed him like an avalanche. I can handle it, as long as Stacy is right for Woland. The meeting seemed to go well, but don't get too excited, Edward whispered, pushing aside a disturbing memory. At the same time, Stacy was lying in bed, thinking about her future. I wonder when Edward will propose to me. Or does he think I'll be his mistress forever? No, not yet, darling, you won't. That's not why I put up with your crazy son. Edward didn't know all of this, of course, and continued to naively believe that Stacy loved him as much as he had loved Vivi. The next morning after breakfast, Stacy walked into Woland's room. So, little one, ready to go for a walk with me? Woland looked at the nurse incredulously to see if she was joking. Those who had gone before her were afraid of walks like fire. It was understandable. If something happened to the boy, who would be responsible? But Stacy persisted. What's up, Woland? Are you going or not? The weather's really nice today. Golden fall. We're going to collect leaves for the herbarium. What herbarium? The boy asked in surprise. Well, what kind of herbarium? For school crafts applications, we'll collect fallen leaves with you. And then we'll take a thick book and put the leaves between the pages. That's what I used to do with my mom, Stacy explained calmly. Wow, that's cool. Can we go to the pond too? They say there are lots of swans and wild ducks there. Stacy smiled. We can, of course. Not only is there a pond with swans and geese, but there are squirrels there too. They're very tame. If you give them a piece of breadcrumbs or a bagel, they'll take it right out of the palm of your hand. Woland's eyes became genuinely interested. The boy also looked at the nurse with respect. Stacy treated him like a normal, full-fledged child. No pity, no sugary sweet sympathy paid for out of Daddy's voluminous wallet. Stacy helped Woland dress and rolled the stroller to the exit. Edward wasn't home, as he had gotten up at the crack of dawn, as usual, in a hurry to get to the office. Stacy called out to them at the door. Where do you think you're going? All dressed up and pretty. We're going to the park to get some fresh air, Stacy replied. To the park? Why don't you stay home? The baby's little, and he's sick. What if he gets worse? And who's going to be responsible for that? Are you going to be responsible? Stacy was indignant. She hadn't really cared about Woland for a long time. The point was different. Stacy had a sudden urge to show her power in the house, to let this girl know who was the boss of the house. Stacy looked sadly at Woland, but the boy didn't want to give up. I can call Daddy if you want and ask permission. But then I'll also tell him about how we got a delicious dinner on the table last night, and I'll remind him about the burnt eggs too. Stacy's face flushed with anger. Okay, he wants to be bossy, that little handicapped kid. On the other hand, Stacy didn't want Edward to see her weaknesses. She'd never been a friend of the kitchen, and not only didn't like cooking, she didn't know how to cook. All right, go ahead. Just be careful out there and don't linger near the water. It's not summer. Stacy gritted her teeth. Woland looked at Stacy with a smile and winked. You know what you're doing, Auntie. It was a lovely walk. Stacy showed Woland the most beautiful places in the park, which she knew like the back of her hand. So they first fed the swans and ducks with bread. Then Woland played with the squirrels. Looking at the boy's joyful face, Penelope could not hold back her tears. And maybe this is happiness. The very thing about which so much has been said, a child's laughter. Is it possible to replace it with something of equal importance? Hardly. Hardly. Are we going to the park tomorrow? Woland asked. These words immediately brought her out of her agonized reverie. We shall, of course, if it doesn't rain. You and I haven't collected any leaves today. When I was little, we had a task for the summer at school, to collect and dry leaves, and in the fall to prepare cones and chestnuts. And then we made crafts during labor lessons. Hedgehogs, different animals. Wow, interesting. And I'm not going to school until next year. That's what Daddy decided. But Aunt Stacy's against it. She says, I'll have half a day of peace and quiet without you. Hey, Auntie, how do you know the park so well? Woland asked. The boy's question struck a nerve. It seemed to be a commonplace curiosity, but it was as if a black cat had run through his heart. I've spent a lot of time here, Woland. First as a student, when I was at university, and then as an adult. I used to come here. Woland looked at Stacy in surprise. I thought you didn't have to study to be a hobo. Well, I've seen in movies that the street teaches them. They also sleep in basements and beg for money all the time. But you're not like that. You are special. Penelope looked at the boy with undisguised amazement, still not knowing whether to laugh or be upset. Volan had quickly labeled her a tramp. Oh my God, it was so obvious, and Edward, did he think she was a homeless beggar? Realizing the awkwardness of her own situation, Stacy had to tell the truth. I'm not a tramp, Woland, and I don't live in a basement. But that's understandable. You're in the room next door now, the kid objected. Stacy shook her hands. Oh, you know everything. I wasn't always like this. I used to be an EMT, just so you know. Just like Dr. Ebelet, Voland persisted. Yes, just like that. I used to go on calls, treat people, and in my spare time I walked in the park. I didn't write poems, but I did it for my soul. Woland looked at her respectfully. She was a good woman. That Aunt Stacy's such a lady and a doctor. She can write poetry, and she knows a lot of things. And then what happened? The curious boy asked again. Stacy turned pale and furtively brushed away a tear. I'm sorry, buddy. Let's do it another time. Okay? It's a very grown-up story. You'll think it's not for children's ears. Just don't tell Daddy about it. It's unnecessary. Volan nodded peacefully. Why offend such a kind aunt? When Volan returned home, the first thing he did was to tell his father about the walk. Edward couldn't believe his eyes when he looked at his joyful son. He hadn't seen Volan this happy in a long time. Stacy, you're magic. I don't know what I would do without you, Edward said with feeling. Stacy looked at the nurse with hatred. If she had her way, that girl would be out of their house in no time. And this wasn't a house. Wolan would have gone to a boarding school for children with disabilities. He's so proud of his master's praise. Stacy's cheeks turned pink, and a slight smile played on her lips. Volan wanted to tell the story he had heard in the park, but then hesitated half a word, remembering his promise. Stacy's lips drew together in a solid line with anger. Well, we'll see whose side it is, she said, a stray thought running through her head. Edward thanked his fiancée for dinner and went to his office. His competitors had been too active lately. Everything they did was in color, as if they knew all his moves ahead of time. But how is it possible? Is there a traitor in the ranks of the company's employees? And why not? You know, you have a lot of envious people. Everyone thinks you're lucky. You just got married, and your wife died right away. Forgive me for saying so, but there's no such thing as coincidence. It's like your son-in-law was waiting for him to show up so he could give his soul to God, Jonathan said. Edward always reacted violently to such statements. What are you doing? Are you out of your mind? I love Vivi, and I wasn't even thinking about her wealth. You may not believe me, but I was against the inheritance in the first place. I would have left it to Voland or some distant relative. Jonathan only shook his head and grinned. Oh, come on, don't be such a Robin Hood either. He didn't want money. Who doesn't think about money nowadays, especially the kind that falls from the sky right into your hands? Edward almost punched his companion in the face that time. He's not a nice guy, Jonathan. Only money, money, and more money, as if there was nothing else in life but money. Stacy, on the other hand, was thinking about something else. How could she help Volan get out of his wheelchair? How could she get the boy to stop focusing on his illness? What if she tried it like this? Okay, that's tomorrow. Today didn't seem likely to work. I'll get up early in the morning. I'll get it right before Wolan wakes up, Stacy whispered with a smile and went to bed. She liked living with Edward's family, especially if she ignored the negativity of her landlady. Stacy could understand it, though. The businessman's fiancée was afraid that the nurse might come to the forefront and overshadow her, the prissy prima donna. But Stacy looked at it with unconcealed irony. How could she possibly compete with Stacy? It's ridiculous. A woman who had lost everything in her life and a hottie who spent her time in beauty parlors and restaurants. The next morning, Stacy got up before everyone else and quietly slipped out of the house. She headed for a place to buy a puppy, a stray. Of course, Stacy knew there was a small, spontaneous market near the train station where retired grandmothers sold herbs from their gardens. Craftsmen were selling products of their talent, and artists were selling all sorts of junk to the suffering. In the midst of this motley mass stood a man with a huge cardboard TV box. The bottom of the box was lined with a soft cloth to make the puppy sitting there more comfortable. The idea was that for a price, anyone could bring the puppy and leave it with the vendor. Situations could be very different. For example, a person found a foundling among garbage cans but could not take it home. What do you know? Maybe the living space does not allow it, or he is allergic to animals, but the puppy needs to be adopted. You can't just leave him starving on the street. A A shelter is a good thing, but it's not a rubber band either. There's not enough room for everyone. That's why there was a little man with a box at the market. He takes the puppies and then sells them to anyone who wants them for a symbolic 5 cents. And the demand is there because the puppies are always fed clean and clean. How can you pass by such little puppies? Of course, even for the symbolic price of selling puppies, the peddler was in a constant loss. But the emotions of being able to place a baby in a new family did not compare to the temporary inconvenience and expense of keeping foster pets. Seeing this, the man smiled happily. "Oh, Stacy's here," he said. "Oh, come on, come on. It's nothing. What do you care about Stacy?" "That's all in the past. I'm just Stacy now," the woman replied. Emmett nodded in agreement, but still remarked, "You'll always be Stacy to me, an ambulance station paramedic. If it weren't for that unfortunate incident, you and I would still be on call today." Stacy frowned. "Not bringing up the past isn't necessary at all. I remember everything perfectly well as it is. I mean, you were the best orderly on my shift, and what happened back then was my fault, and no one else's. I got you fired, and you warned me. You saw the driver of that foreign car dying, and I went in anyway. I gave him a shot, and the patient was allergic to the drug. He was doomed anyway. That's what the board proved, after the autopsy. They found a lot of alcohol in that businessman's blood. Thank God no one was hurt." Emmett turned pale and clenched his fists painfully. "What do you mean no one was hurt? What about you and me? We got kicked out with a wolf's license. We had to stop practicing medicine. It was a high-profile case. The father of the victim was a big shot, so they put us on trial. They wanted to charge us with criminal negligence. And what was the negligence? That the poor guy had half a minute to live. We took a chance and tried to save him. Thanks to the judge and the lawyer, he was a good one. We avoided a felony." Stacy looked into the former orderly's eyes and saw tears in them. "Oh, Emmett, you're worthless," she said quietly. She thought sadly, but did not pursue the unpleasant topic further. "All right, enough already. We've talked about it 100 times. I'm sick of it myself. I'm actually here on business. I'd like more, Oberyn." The former orderly raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Is that what I thought it was? Can I congratulate you, Stacy?" "No," the woman smiled. "You know, I got pregnant after all these events, and I can't have any more children. That's why my husband left me. He went to a young woman, filed for divorce. He's got the house for himself. I have nothing left. Anyway, I'm homeless now. But it doesn't matter. Show me the puppy." Emmett sighed heavily and began to show his former colleague the babies he had in stock today. After a moment's hesitation, Stacy decided on a snow-white pup with black ears and tail. Looking at him, it looked like someone had intentionally painted over those body parts to make adjustments to his appearance. "Good choice. But I warn you at once, he will grow up big. He has in his relatives either a Labrador or an Alibi. So take that into account," Emmett said. "See how big his foot is? Only giants have those." Stacy smiled and gave her former co-worker everything she had in her pocket. Emmett tried to refuse and return the money, but it was all in vain. "Goodbye. I'll drop by again. I'm sorry I'm late for work." The nurse is looking after the boy, but not for long. Emmett looked at his former boss and turned his attention back to the babies in the box. When Stacy entered the room with a white puppy in her arms, Volan's joy knew no bounds. "Wow, what a handsome boy. Can we call him Snowball?" Stacy smilingly handed the baby to Voland. "Of course you can. Especially since he's as white as snow. But you brought a dog into the house. You should at least ask before you make such decisions. Is he even vaccinated? What if he's got fleas or shingles or rabies? What then?" Stacy came into the living room. "Oh, come on. He's a normal puppy. A friend of mine gave him to me. He is mostly mongrels, but they're all vaccinated. He brings the vet in once a week," said Stacy. "Look, this is a real game changer. A mongrel, and he's vaccinated. It's like nothing I've ever seen in the house before," Stacy exclaimed. Edward came into the living room, as Edward was getting ready for work. "What's all the commotion? We must have a new tenant. What's his name?" "Snowball." "Daddy, can I keep it?" Volan begged. Father smiled. "Oh, you can, my friend, no problem. Why not? I even like the name, and the dog's a good dog." When Stacy heard his answer, she almost choked with anger. But she didn't resist. She went to her room. Voldemort put the baby on his lap and rode him around the room in his stroller. Stacy looked at Edward with a smile. and he nodded approvingly. In his opinion, the nurse was definitely doing a solid A, maybe even an A+. On the way to work, Edward thought about the situation in his office. The thing was, he had made a very serious and reliably legal enemy. For the same reason, most of the deals he had made had failed, but the worst of it was that the information about future contracts was stored in Edward's personal safe, the same one that had been robbed not too long ago. Of course, the lock on the safe had been replaced with a newer and better one, but the fact remained. The information on his latest deal could have been leaked by someone either in the household or very close to him. But who? Could it have been Stacy? And how? How could she have gotten the code to the safe? Edward's mood dropped noticeably. There was obviously something wrong with this nurse. Why wouldn't she tell me anything about her past? What if she was the mole? The timing and her strange behavior all matched. At that moment, a very interesting thought occurred to Edward. What if he installed hidden surveillance cameras in the house, but only secretly, so that no one would know about them, not even Woland? No, he is not a mole, of course, but because of his age, he can easily give away everything he knows. The businessman liked the idea so much that instead of the office, he went to a large electronics store. The salesman patiently listened to him and then pointed to one of the models. Here, pay attention to this model. On the plus side, it has a fairly long battery life. The recording itself can be streamed in real time directly to your phone. Storage to Penelope by choice, you can upload to the internet, and you can upload to an internal drive. Installation is very simple, does not require any special skills for installation at all. Edward smiled contentedly. Oh, that suits me just fine. But I'd like to keep this purchase a secret. The salesman nodded understandingly, not forgetting to mention that their firm practiced complete confidentiality. It took Edward about an hour to install the cameras. The businessman was lucky, because that was when Voland had gone for a walk with Stacy and the puppy to the city park, and Stacy had already been in the beauty parlor for the last hour to get even more effect from her unruly curls. Well, let's see what kind of fish I've got in my net, Edward thought with a smile. In case the cameras didn't work, he intended to install them in the office for the same purpose as at home. The wait was about 3 days. At first, there was nothing interesting on the tapes. The tenants behaved in the same way as before. Life went on as before. No special secrets or unexplored discoveries. But what Edward saw on the tape of the 3rd day shocked him. He could not believe his eyes. The surprise was so intense that he was speechless for a while. The fact was that his son Voland, left at home alone, had been walking quietly about the rooms. So his traveling in a wheelchair was a deception. Unable to contain his emotions, Edward headed for his son's room. Seeing Stacy there with the puppy, he motioned for the nurse to come out. "Dad, why are you doing this?" "Don't send Stacy away. I'm only going to talk to her," the boy begged, pale as a sheet. His father looked at the nurse and waved his hand. "Fine, let her stay. I have no secrets from her. Especially not a secret that it's you that's keeping us." Woland looked fearfully at Stacy, but she smiled and shifted her gaze to Edward. "I apologize for switching to you again, but I have a rough guess at what this conversation is about." "And what do you think it's about?" Edward asked ironically. Stacy deliberately paused for a moment, then said, "It's going to be about the fact that your son isn't sick at all and has been moving around like a healthy man for the past 6 months." "And how do you know that?" "It's not like I've told anyone about it," Voland exclaimed. Stacy smiled. "I noticed it from the house slippers, buddy. Whenever there were no adults in the house, they somehow changed their position." Voland sighed sadly, and after some hesitation rose from his wheelchair, taking a few steps around the room. Edward watched his son without looking away, still not believing what was happening. Finally, realizing that all this was indeed reality and not a dream, he still asked Voland, "Why? What's the point? This has all been going on for months now." Stacy immediately touched his shoulder, hinting that the child needed to be spoken to more gently. Tears ran down Voland's cheeks. "This is all because of Stacy. Dad, you've been paying so much attention to her lately that if I even got out of the stroller, you'd completely forget about me. I really couldn't walk at first. And then when I got better, I started pretending. So you'd take care of me like you used to." Edward's heart trembled. Hugging his son, he lifted him easily into his arms and spun him around the room. Stacy stood back and smiled. She had discovered Voland's deception almost immediately, but she wouldn't reveal the little boy's secret. Let him decide when it was better to come out of the shadows and appear before everyone in a new image. "But then who was examining the documents in my safe?" Edward asked anxiously. Stacy shrugged her shoulders in confusion. Voland, on the other hand, had his suspicions. "Dad, it's Stacy one day, when she thought everyone was asleep. I snuck into your office. The light was on, but you weren't at your desk. And what happened next? Father asked eagerly. Volan hesitated for a moment and then, gathering his wits, said Stacy was in the study. She opened the safe somehow. She was also talking to some man on a video link. What was his name? Hector. Gosh, some really weird name there. I can't remember. Maybe Jonathan. Are you sure of your own guess? Edward asked. Ah, that's right. Jonathan. Jonathan for sure. Edward sank down in his chair with a groan. What is this? There are traitors everywhere. Stacy, Jonathan. But what could possibly connect them? That same day, Edward gave his fiancée a thorough interrogation. At first she'd refused, made a surprised face. But when Wolan rode into the room in a wheelchair and rose from it in a spectacular manner, she gave up and waved her hand. It's all your late father-in-law's fault. Edward, Ben actually happens to be my biological father. For a while in his turbulent youth, he lived on 2 families, and as a result, he had 2 daughters, one legitimate, Vivi, and the other like me, a gray mouse born into a sinful relationship. When my father died, not a muscle in my face quivered. 2 years earlier, I had buried my mother. She had drunk herself to death because of that lustful bugger, but justice was served. I've waited all these years for a reason. Vivi, my sister, went to the grave right after her father. I was getting ready to gather documents to prove my kinship when I found out that that fool had bequeathed all the money from the Semyonov family to you, to that fool Yemela from the village. Edward's cheeks flared, but he held back. Stacy continued. You've been sitting on the stove for years, and you would have been for years if it hadn't been for that fool. You should have left everything to your husband. You're a country bumpkin. Look at you. You stink of dung a mile away. Stop hurting my father, you bastard. Volan couldn't help himself. And Stacy spoke up. No, no, no. I told Jonathan to come up with something original. He's a fool. He's trying to ruin you. Because Edward's inheritance was a windfall. He took it by surprise. You should share it. It was his men who robbed you 2 years ago. You don't believe me. How do you think they got a detailed plan of the rooms in the house? They took a lot of money, but you got out of it. You got the insurance. You're lucky. Edward. Stacy snarled and headed for the exit. No one was going to stop her. What was the point? There was nothing to convict her of anyway. There was no evidence on hand, and a little boy's words were not going to stick. Edward sighed and walked over to Penelope and Boland, then hugged them both. Birds were singing to the businessman's heart that he had identified as enemies, and the black streak in his life was finally coming to an end. It was all the fault of money and envy. Jonathan was detained the very next day. Out of resentment and deep disappointment in her hapless lover, Stacy promised to testify against him. Edward had a new life, and Penelope took a special place in it. However, she was not a housewife for long, and with the support of her husband opened a shelter for homeless animals. Victor became the manager of the shelter. Now people brought puppies not to the market, but directly to the shelter, where there were all the conditions for their living. They gave the puppies into good hands. Victor, as he used to do, asked for a penny for food, but not for profit, but for the memory of the past, when he used this change, along with part of his earnings, to buy food and medicines for the babies. As Victor had promised, Snowball eventually grew to the size of a calf and could easily knock a grown man off his feet. Olin went to school and brings home only good grades. At the same time, he calls Penelope mom and stands up for her. He also brags to his friends that soon he will have a brother. Whether this is true or not, it is difficult to say, but judging by the noticeably rounded tummy Penelope, the words of the boy is not meaningless.
Julia was born when her mother was 33 years old. It was a long-awaited child, whom everyone loved from the moment of conception. "Barry, I'm pregnant," Selena told her husband. Well, finally, he hugged her. From that moment, when everyone found out that a daughter and granddaughter would soon be born, Selena began to be watched and cared for very closely. Up to that point, Barry and Selena had tried many times to have a child, but nothing had worked out. Not that there had been miscarriages or anything, but not even a pregnancy. "How are you feeling?" Grandma asked Selena all the time. "Fine," she answered. "Nothing's bothering you?" The old lady was worried that something might happen. "No, if something happens, I'll be sure to tell," Selena assured everyone. Almost the whole pregnancy, the girl went well. Nothing bothered her. Her stomach did not hurt. Everyone helped her as much as they could. A couple of times at the end of the term, she had high blood pressure, so she had to go to the hospital. Otherwise, everything went well. Oh, I heard Barry in the night. Darling, what's wrong? I heard my husband moaning. I think I've got it all started. She held her stomach. For this occasion, they had everything ready. The bags were packed. The car was standing near the entrance. All that was left was to pack everything, get in, and drive to the hospital, which they did. That's it. Come on, love. He left her alone. That's it. I'll call you. She kissed him and went into the maternity ward. If the beginning was rapid, then everything calmed down. I'm in pain, cried Selena. Nothing, Barrett. Barrett, soothed her midwife. But the girl could not tolerate. She asked to be put anesthetized or something else, just to relieve this terrible pain. Everything started very long. The pain was so stretched out that Selena thought she would just die here on this labor chair. But when the baby's head came through, her whole body just slipped out of her. And immediately there was a relief that could not even be expressed in words. Selena looked at her baby and couldn't believe she'd done it. Julia, she stroked her head. Congratulations, Mommy, the doctor told her. Thank you, exhaled Selena. In a few hours, she was already in the room. They brought her daughter to be fed. It was all so unusual and unfamiliar. The girl was born at 4 in the morning. At this time, Selena did not call her husband because she did not want to wake him up and disturb him. But when the morning came, she didn't spare him. Barry, you become the father of a beautiful baby girl, she said into the phone. Darling, thank you for your daughter, he told her. And by lunchtime, the young husband was at the hospital window. He was smiling, looking at his daughter. And then, during the day, all the other relatives began to pull up: mother, grandmother, mother-in-law. All of them wished only health to this new person who was born. When will you be discharged? Her mother asked her. They promised the 3rd day, Selena said. I see what you mean. They wanted to go to their apartment to clean it. On the 3rd day, indeed, Selena and her daughter were discharged. Around the maternity hospital met all the same relatives. After that, they decided not to bother the young mother, to let her settle in a little, and I'll probably go with you, the grandmother said. Okay, Selena was fine with everyone else going too. Yes, she had a baby, but in the hospital she complained that she was 30 years old, but it was her first child, and she didn't know what to do with it. They helped her give birth, and then just threw the baby away, and that was it. She's already resented it. So now she's decided she's going to do it herself. Barry, please put the kettle on and make some unsweetened porridge, she asked her husband. Now give me 1 minute, the young man told her, then went to the kitchen, rattled the dishes, and then returned with a plate of freshly made porridge. Here, thank you, thanked his wife. Aren't you tired? He asked her. Not too tired, she admitted frankly. Selena really was not very tired because there were so many helpers around. Well, my favorite daughter, Selena liked to talk to her when no one was home. Do you want me to read you a book? After these words, she would take in her hands fairy tales. While her mother read to her daughter, she would lie there and look at her. It was immediately clear that this was a curious child. All the relatives came daily to Selena because it was the only child in their family. Aren't you tired? Barry often asked her in the evenings. After bathing and putting the child to bed, it is a pleasant fatigue, his wife answered him. I'm glad for that you don't complain like so many other mamas. Her husband kissed her. It was always like that. The older Julia got, the more curious she became. Where did this come from? What is this? She asked her grandmother when she visited her. Here, look, she told everything calmly. She had nowhere to hurry. Interestingly, the girl liked to climb through her grandmother's closets. In them stood different boxes, and in them were jewelry, brooches, beads, earrings, rings. All this girl poured out on the floor. She liked to dress up. In general, Julia spent a lot of time with her grandmother. Selena went to work. The girl had to leave her with someone, so the grandmother agreed because she did not want to give her to the early kindergarten. Thank you, Mom. Selena came by tonight. It's my pleasure, she hugged her daughter. Grandma taught the little girl a lot of things. They cooked dumplings together, chopped cabbage, cooked cold soup. Julia was interested in everything. Why is this picture hanging here? Granddaughter asked her grandmother. It's a picture from a fairy tale. The woman began to tell. Which one? Sat down and prepared to listen to her granddaughter. And why is it here? The insistent girl asked. For beauty. Isn't it beautiful? The woman was surprised. Beautiful, agreed her granddaughter. So let it hang. The grandmother always diverted this conversation. Selena tried to spend a lot of time with her daughter. She and Barry went to the movies every weekend, not forgetting to take the little girl with them. They spent a lot of time together as a family. Would you come this weekend? Barry's mother asked them. Of course, they were used to getting together like this. Her husband's father had passed away a long time ago, and Selena didn't have a father either, so they didn't leave their mothers behind. Why don't I have grandfathers? Julia often asked. They happened to be in heaven, Grandma said sadly. It's a pity. We would go for walks with them. Julia was a little girl, but very sensible. Often staying with her grandmother, they learned poems, so the little girl's memory was perfectly developed. Already in a year, at New Year's matinee, she could tell long poems. Everything was good, little girl. Do not sit at home, but in the garden. To go to the garden must go. As then on the weekend came Selena home to his mother. It is a pity to give such a little girl, although Julia was already 3 years old. For relatives, she will always remain a little girl. It's okay, let her go. There are guys there socializing, Selena said. She understood that her mother could sit with her for as long as she wanted, but she had to enter society. Yeah, I agree, Olivia sighed. And so the day came when Julia had to go to kindergarten. The first day was difficult. The girl came to kindergarten normally. She did not cry, did not ask to go home. But when we went for a walk to the plot, she took the big stick and just went home. We lived close by. Barry was getting ready for work. He was shaving in the hallway when he heard a knock on the door. Where are you coming from? He looked at his daughter with frightened eyes. I'm going home, Julia said in a businesslike manner. No, Terry, that won't do. He gathered himself and took the child back to the daycare center. Oh, thank you for not panicking. The teacher thanked him. No way, I know my daughter, he smiled. I can't figure out who's missing, she said to Barry. That's it, watch the kids. I got to run, he said. And then he left. After that, there were no more incidents at the daycare center. Julia was on her best behavior. Well, how is my daughter here? Asked the mother from the teacher. All is well, but just does not give children to learn poetry, complained the woman. What do you mean? Selena didn't understand. I put notes in the lockers in the evening, and she takes them out of there, learns everything, and then, as the smartest at the party alone tells everything, said the teacher. It's so clear she can read, so she can't learn. Her grandmother taught her to read a long time ago. That's what I'm talking about. The kindergarten worker shook her head. Let's hope that this is a transitional period, and soon everything will get better, hoped the mother. Indeed, the further Julia went to the daycare center, the better things got. The girl spent more and more time at her grandmother's house. Together they went to the garden, made beds there, planted them. When there were the first sprouts, they thinned them out, then weeded them. And at the end of the summer, when the whole harvest was gathered, it was collected in bags and lowered into the pit. Fa, exhausted, imitated a little girl grandmother. The surrounding only laughed at her. Oh, so young and already so tired, clapped on the sides of the grandmother. They spent time together very often. While her mother was pursuing her career, Julia was with her grandmother all the time. We should go to my homeland, Olivia once said. How? Her granddaughter asked. She had told her many times, but Julia had never been there. Would you take me with you? The girl looked with such eyes that it was hard to refuse. At the weekend, they went to the bus station, took a bus there, and went to the place where the woman was born. And who lives there now? All the way the granddaughter asked questions. No one, just a house left, sighed Olivia. Why did it stay there? The granddaughter wondered. It's just that everyone has gone to town, so it's just sitting there. The grandmother tried to explain. And what will we do there? Asked the next question the girl. Nothing. We'll warm the house, see what's in the vegetable garden, go to the bathhouse, and in the evening we'll go back. Olivia told her the plan for the day. Yes, a lot to do, shook her head like an adult Julia. A lot, sighed Grandma. That would arrive, do all the things the woman had talked about before. After that, they washed in the bathhouse, and then drank delicious tea with honey. Well, back, asked the grandmother. Ah, shouted the girl, and again they were shaking in the bus. It was time to graduate from kindergarten, and again all the relatives were here, next to the girl. Mom, Dad, grandmothers congratulated her on the first completed step in her life, or rather the past step. School was ahead, but Julia was not afraid of it. She was waiting for her to come to the classroom and sit at the desk. Are you ready? Mom and Dad were standing in the hallway. The grandmothers were coming to the line. Yes, she nodded her head. Good riddance then. Her father pushed her toward the door. They arrived in the schoolyard and the grandmothers were already there. Everyone was in a good mood, congratulating their child for going to school for the first time. I promise you that I will study well, the girl said to her relatives. And we'll help you, they said. Well, I think you and I will often have to do our lessons together. Olivia was sure of it. She loved her grandmother, and she loved her grandmother back. The first bell rang and the children went to their class. Dear first graders, the teacher said the first word to them, I wish you a bright road. After the class hour was over, the boys poured out into the schoolyard. Today it was already possible to go home. To me, the grandmother looked at her granddaughter because she knew that her parents had to go to work. Yes, Julia loved to spend time with her most favorite person, so she always enjoyed going to visit her. Her grandmother told her granddaughter often the same story, how she was little, how she came into the world, what she did. Olivia was born in the distant 1933. She lived happily with her parents. Nothing said that there would be something terrible. But the war began. The parents went to the front, and the girl was sent to an orphanage because she was very small. But when she was 7 years old, there was a fire in the institution. Everything burned, including all the personal files and documents. They made new documents for the children, where their age was put on their site. That's when I was 5 years older, because I was tall and strong, Olivia said. And then there was a war, her granddaughter asked her. Yes, but it did not come to our town. We were only evacuated, continued to tell her grandmother. And what happened next was interesting to the girl. She studied in the 5th grade. They began to pass the theme of the Great Patriotic War. To us in the city, evacuated a whole factory. It used to be on the territory of Ukraine, and in September it was brought to us, Olivia recalled. Wow, and how it was rebuilt again, asked the girl. I can't tell you that, because I don't know, but it was built very quickly, that's for sure. And after that, both old and young went to work there. Grandmother immersed herself so much in memories that it seemed she was not here at all. And you worked there too? The girl was amazed. Of course, together with my mother, we, when it was possible, went home. But mostly, we were always at the production. They worked in several shifts then. So many people just spent the day and night there. Many people had no shoes. It was impossible to walk. There were iron shavings on the floor. You had to protect your feet somehow. And if you walked in the same shoes, both on the street and indoors, you wouldn't have enough felt boots, my grandmother recalled. Wow, you were a child. Sat and looked out the window of Julia. Grandmother never said anything like that, and Mom too. That's nothing, we kids who worked there. Sometimes we couldn't even reach the machine, but we had to. We put the crates, and so we stood there all day long. Cried the woman. Apparently she remembered something. Tell me something else, my granddaughter asked. What to tell? Times were hard. There was nothing to eat, nothing to wear. We struggled as we could. Wiped her tears, grandmother. Don't be so upset. It was all a long time ago. Julia pitied her. Okay, baby girl, hugged her grandmother. There was a very close bond between them. They sat on the bed, hugging, Olivia still sobbing, remembering how and what she'd had as a child. This story made Julia's mind reel, and she decided to write a report on it because it involved her grandmother. What are you thinking about? Her grandmother leaned over her. Nothing. I want to write a story about you and tell it to my classmates in class, disclosed her granddaughter. Okay, Olivia agreed. They took out the pictures, which for some reason had been in the grandmother's reticule, and began to look at them. Where are all these people? Asked her granddaughter. Who is where? The grandmother was evading the answer. How I would like to have a big family, said the girl. And you have a small one? The woman was surprised and laughed. Not as big as I would like, not even a grandfather. She curved her lips as if she wanted to start crying. It's all right. Yes, that's how it happened in our lives, shook her head grandmother. And where did he die in the war? Asked the girl. I don't want to talk about that. Olivia turned away from her. Well, and then someday will you tell me? Looked her granddaughter in the eyes. Maybe, the woman promised and changed the subject. No, I don't want to talk about it. The grandmother started talking about school and what happens in it. Why, I need to know about your business, Olivia wondered. I want to know about your childhood, how your mother was born. I'm interested in all that, Julia insisted. Well, maybe someday I'll tell you all about it, or maybe your mother will tell you, she said. Okay, you think I'm still young, don't you? Guessed the girl. Everything is possible, and now let's go to the kitchen. I'll show you how to start the dough for pancakes. Grandma taught her granddaughter different wisdom, which will be useful later in ordinary life. Julia already knew how to take a hook, needles, to make any kind of dough, cooking, and all this at the age of 10. No, I cannot do it. Could not stir the girl flour into the liquid, so that there were no lumps. Nothing, Washington was not built at once, Grandma said calmly. They made the dough, made pancakes, then Grandma made morsels, and they were full. Well, shall we go and lie down for a while? The old lady asked her. Okay, they went to the room that used to be Mom's room. There was a TV set in it, but it didn't work well, and the same picture hung on the wall. Can you tell me the story? Grandma asked her granddaughter. This picture has haunted me since childhood, smiled the girl. Julia was still chattering when she heard her grandmother already sniffling. She covered her eyelids too, deciding to take a little nap. That's how they slept, cuddled together. Grandma was the first to wake up, realizing that they had been asleep for more than 3 hours. No wonder, first so much to cut, then not so much to sleep, she said to herself. Baba Olivia, Julia called out to her when she woke up. What's up, my dear? She peeked into the room. You know, I was just thinking, that's where my daddy works, she said. Yes, so he is the only one in town, stroked her on the head grandmother. So it has been functioning in our town for many years. It was such an interesting topic that the girl decided to ask her parents about it at home. Julia was so impressed with the different stories today that she wanted to learn more and more. She herself started reading about the local city-forming enterprise, what it does, why it was evacuated here, who works here, and other things. Everything was interesting. Daddy, it turns out that you work at such an enterprise, which helped people in wartime. She came home in the evening happy. Yes, did you know that? He was surprised. No, only today my grandmother told me, my daughter told him. Wow. And you were not taken on an excursion? He asked. They did, but they didn't tell me about it. Apparently they thought it was too early, she concluded. The girl was growing up. She remained very curious. She was interested in everything, especially in what was connected with the war. When she was in the 8th grade, she already knew a lot about the local factory. She wrote more than one report on the subject, and the information still did not end. Grandma, tell me something more about our plant, she often asked her. What to tell? I have already told you everything. The woman did not understand. Well, I don't even know. Julia herself did not understand why she had developed such an interest in this institution. The girl had been collecting materials, sitting in the plant's library for a long time. Julia already knew almost by sight all those who in different years led this enterprise. If she had been woken up at night and asked him what year the plant was evacuated and started working, she would have told it with her eyes closed. Couldn't any of our relatives have worked there? She asked her grandmother once. Why such questions? She didn't understand. It's just that so many people work there and no one is our relative, she asked. I don't know. The woman shrugged her shoulders. I see, we will find out further. Julia did not want to give up. In her head has long settled the idea to find at least some of their relatives. It can't be that everyone came from somewhere and there are no relatives. Julia had long watched the program Looking for You. She dreamed that when she grew up, she would write a letter there and look for her grandfather or his children. She even told her grandmother about it, but she just waved her hand. You'll only waste your time, she said then. And what if I find someone? Argued her granddaughter. Let's make a deal. You'll do it after I'm gone. Grandma Olivia asked her. Let's see, the girl thought to herself, that grandma might live for many more years. This was a topic they had brought up and mused about more than once. The girl also learned that during the evacuation of the plant, together with him came several specialists from abroad, and further did not stop coming. It was very interesting, so Julia did not leave this topic. Grandma, why did you give birth to only one daughter? One day her granddaughter asked her. It just so happened she couldn't find anything to answer. Now I would have aunts and uncles, and so no one. Daddy is also at grandma one was sad girl. Why are you so caught up in these relatives? Olivia did not understand. I don't know, it's a big city, the factory too. During the war, whoever came here. And there are no relatives, she was saddened. Well, no and no, you will get more, pressed her lips grandmother, because now there is nothing to change. That's right, the girl was all grown up. Olivia was glad she'd lived to be at least that age. It's not scary to leave now, she often said. What are you starting again? She and Julia were at the cottage. The girl had just gone on vacation. She had finished 9th grade. I should have taken my father with me. He would have attached the hoses to the pipes. They were supposed to turn on the irrigation today, and everything was broken. So let's ask him in the evening. He will come and do everything, suggested her granddaughter. Okay, agreed with her grandmother. They spent the whole day digging, making, and shaping beds. After that, they planted beets and carrots, as well as onions. After tired, they got ready to go home. They went to the bus stop, got on the bus, drove home. Julia went to her parents to tell her father about the pipes, and Olivia went home. Father, Granny, and I need help. The girl came home. Speak up. Barry listened to her. Tonight there will be watering and we have all the hoses broken, complained the daughter. Don't worry, I'll get it done. He got dressed and went to the store to buy clamps and hoses. Everything was purchased and the man went to the garden. The job took only a few minutes. In an hour, Barry was back in town. The hoses were ready. Julia was supposed to be at her grandmother's house by 7 o'clock, and they would go to the garden again. But her girlfriends came for her. Are you coming with us? They were waiting for her answer. That's right, I had completely forgotten. She remembered that she had promised the girl's friends to go for a walk with them today. Come on, Grandma can handle it all by herself, the friends urged. Yes, moreover, my father did everything. She nodded her head that there was nothing complicated there. Well, let's go for a walk, because with these vegetable gardens she forgot all about us, her friends asked her. All right, agreed Julia. She went into the apartment, changed her clothes, and went out to her friends. This evening they had to go to the disco. The girl thought she was letting her grandmother down, but she also wanted to spend time with the girls, so she decided not to think about it. In the evening she still went to the disco, and it was very late when she came home. She opened the door with her keys, entered the apartment. It was silent. She thought her parents were asleep. She tiptoed in, but there was no one in the room. I don't get it. Where's everyone? Julia turned on the light. She went to the other room, but there was no one there either. The girl went out on the balcony. The apartment was on the top floor. Opposite was visible the house of grandmother. In her windows was burning light. What? Did not understand the girl. She knew for sure that the grandmother at this time is always asleep. Julia gathered herself again and went to her grandmother's house. Luckily, she lived only a block away. The girl was shaking and couldn't stop shaking. By the time she got to Olivia's house, her whole body was shaking. She entered the entryway, went up to the floor, opened the doors. Everyone was here. The ambulance, the neighbors, the other grandmother. Mom, what's wrong with Grandma? Julia asked. She's not well, Selena said in a dead voice. And what happened? Granddaughter did not understand. Just a few hours ago, they were digging beds with her, and now she is sick. I don't know, something with her heart, so I called an ambulance. The woman was on the verge of hysterics. Olivia was hospitalized. They took her away in an ambulance. Now the grandmother was in the hospital. Selena and her daughter visited her grandmother every day. They didn't want anything terrible to happen, but they couldn't prevent it. What they feared most of all happened. How could it be? Everyone was crying around the woman's coffin. Barry, what happened? His wife asked him. I arrived that day. I did as I was asked. And then when Olivia arrived, she said there was nothing, he said. How could that have happened? Selena looked at her husband incredulously. I don't know. I didn't believe her. I decided to check it myself. And I went there again to the garden when I was there. I saw that there was really nothing, he said. But you did? The wife clarified. Of course, why should I deceive? I looked. There was all cut off. It was obvious that the man considers himself guilty of what happened. Calm down, Selena hugged him. There were a lot of people at the funeral, all condoling with the relatives. Selena and Julia were inconsolable. Grandma, cried her granddaughter. She didn't understand how she was going to live without her now. After the funeral, everyone went to the dining room and then home. We have to learn to live without Grandma, Selena said. I understand, the girl nodded. They had to finish 2 more grades of school before they could go anywhere. Now the topic of war was especially relevant. At school, they often asked to write essays on these topics, and always Julia wrote about her grandmother. She raised the topic of the factory, which she had long studied. It turned out that there was still a lot of interesting things. The girl wrote about it, the workers who stood at the origins and other things. Mom, and you have not tried to find your father? Once asked her daughter from Selena. Oh, and why should I? If he for all these years did not want to communicate with me, then I have no reason to look for him, said the one. And I wonder who my grandfather was. This question has long tormented the girl. If you want, you can look for him, said the woman. Okay, Julia collected all the documents of her mother. She knew little about her father. You don't even have to ask about the last name. The mother warned her right away. Then how will I find him? Julia didn't understand. I don't know, her mother shrugged. Well, let's wait a little longer. Maybe he had other children. Maybe they will find us, the girl concluded. The 11th grade was coming to an end. It was necessary to pass final exams and to enter somewhere. Julia was not worried. She chose history because she studied in a humanitarian class. She knew that, even if she didn't learn the ticket, she had a lot of things to say in her head. Are you ready for the exams? Her mom asked her. Yes, of course, her daughter never let her down. She always studied well. She came to the exams. She got a ticket about the war, specifically about the blockade. It's a very sad topic. While Julia was talking, she saw tears in the eyes of the commission members. Well, Mom greeted her daughter. 5. What else could it be? Smiled in response. Then there was literature, which the girl also passed on excellent, well, and written subjects. Will you come to my graduation? Julia asked her mother. I do not even know if they will let her go from work, the woman said, but she really wanted to get there. And so this solemn day came. Julia in a beautiful dress, with a hairstyle, went to school with a bouquet of flowers. Selena promised to come later. The girls were all handsome, the guys in strict suits. And where are you going now? They asked each other about enrollment. I'm in the neighboring city in the pedagogical college, Julia said. Clearly, no one else from you and did not expect, laughed girlfriends. I think it is just in my interests, said the girl. When they announced the beginning of the ceremony, Julia saw her mother enter the hall. She walked over to the other parents and sat down on a chair. I congratulate our graduates of today, the headmistress spoke. After her, the teachers came out, and then the parents. Everyone received their diploma and everyone went to their classrooms where the students congratulated their class teachers. And then there was an informal part in the canteen. Parents did their best for the children. They set the tables, even had champagne. After that, pupils and parents went away. According to the custom, yesterday's school children went to meet the dawn, and the older ones stayed at school. Some went home, but no one was offended. Well, it's time to go to school, Julia's mom said on her day off. Good, that one was ready for it. They got on the bus and drove to the next town. There were no problems with the enrollment. They just had to go to the institute a few times. And then there were exams. Everything went easily. The girl didn't even realize how it went. Congratulations, you are now applicants, said the woman who announced the results of enrollment. Now go home, Selena told her daughter. Good, she agreed. Now she had to decide where she would live, in a dormitory or rent an apartment. Where would you like to live? Her mom asked her. In an apartment, of course, her daughter told her. Well, all students live in a dormitory. If you don't live there, you won't feel like a student, Selena said. Okay, I'll first move into the dorm and then we'll see, agreed the girl. Hearing agreed, the mother realized that the apartment she would not be able to pull, even if her husband adds. All summer Julia spent at home. She walked with friends, went to discos, had a blast. At the end of August, she went to check into the dormitory. Hi, when she entered the room, there were already two girls there. Hello, they greeted her. My name is Julia. The girl introduced herself from the doorstep. I'm Kira and this is Nellie. The girls had already gotten to know each other. Nice to meet you. She set her bag on the bed. I wonder who else will visit us. One bed was empty. The girls were sorting out their things. No one had stopped by today. In the evening, they all cooked together in the kitchen and got to know the other tenants. The next day, they went to the institute together. It was interesting and fun. The whole day, they were familiarized with the subjects, with the teachers. And then the real study began. So how did you like it at the institute? Julia asked me in the evening. Nothing so normally, Kira shrugged her shoulders. Interesting, at least for now, Nellie said. They continued to live, be friends and study together. Julia could go home every weekend because her town wasn't very far away, but she didn't want to because they also had school on Saturday, and that wasn't very convenient. You're not going again? Her friends asked. No, it is better to go for a walk with you, said the girl. Okay, but there was no time to go for a walk, they told her. The girls spent a lot of time studying. They tried to work for credit in the first 6 months. The first 6 months you work for the credit. The rest of the time the credit works for you. Her mother often told her. This meant that you had to do everything first to get good grades and favor with the teachers. And already in the next sessions, the examiners will look in the credit card. They do not want to spoil the good marks and put automatic. But all the same, there was time for walks. They were young, so they had time for a lot of things. The first year was over very quickly. Julia was going home for summer vacation. They said goodbye to the girls. Julia invited them to visit her, but they realized that they would meet in 2 months, so they didn't regret the parting. And really, those couple of months flew by very quickly, and now it's August again, and they're back in their room. Hey, it's like they broke up yesterday. They all met up together. And don't tell me they hugged. Now they already had a cohesive team. They could go out on the first day. So who had a good summer? Julia asked. In my field, said Nellie. I was herding cows and harvesting hay. Wow, I've never done that before. Julia was surprised. I see you're a city girl, said her friend. And you? They asked Kira, and I'm no way, almost all the time sat at home. She did not know what to say. All is clear with you, waved at her girlfriends. They started to live again like last year. Studying, preparing, socializing, everything was fine. Listen, let's have a party in the dormitory sometime, Kira suggested. Why, we can't, we all know each other. Why not celebrate? Agreed girlfriends. Now it remained to choose a holiday, and the day when they would celebrate it. Certainly not New Year's Eve. At that moment, everyone goes home. Nellie began to list. Let's have a student's day. Julia suggested it. Indeed, it happens in the middle of the week. The others agreed with her. After that, they gathered people on their floor and told them the idea. No one refused. That's great. All the students were happy. That was the end of it, and study continued. What are you going to do after graduation? One evening, Kira and Julia were talking. Oh, what questions you have? You still have to finish it, she laughed. Do you doubt that? She raised an eyebrow. No, but it's a long time away, Julia said. Yeah, look how fast a year and a half has flown by. It'll be the same amount of time, and then it'll be the GCSEs. Kira was sure of it. I don't know, I'll work. I'll go to school. She didn't doubt it, if nothing changes. But I don't want to go to school, she said dreamily. Where to? Julia wondered. I don't know. I could go to a museum. Kira shrugged her shoulders. I didn't think about it. She stared at one point. And I recently learned that there was such an education they also take. The girl specifically found out. I see. Julia was thinking about something. What are you thinking about? I was wondering about her friend. Yes, about relatives, the girl admitted. And what do you think about them? Kira asked. Nothing. I don't have them, Julia said sadly. What do you mean? I don't understand. And just like that, for a long time I wanted to write to the program where people are looking for people, but I don't know anything. She was almost crying. Why are you so upset? Everything will be fine. Your relatives will be found. Kira tried to calm her down. Okay, I'm sorry, wiped her friend's tears. They hugged each other and sat like that for a long time. It was New Year's Eve and everyone went home. And when they arrived, the students began to prepare for the holiday, which they had agreed to celebrate. "Some strange guys are coming today," Nellie said. "Well, we'll get acquainted," laughed Julia. "I'm afraid there won't be enough for all of them," her friend also laughed. When January 25th came, everything was ready in the dormitory. The girls made sandwiches, the boys bought wine. They all set the table together. The unfamiliar boys really came. He sat down at the table across from Julia. The girl kept her eyes on him. "Hi," he got out of the table and walked over to her. "Hello," she held out her hand. "Let's go talk," he beckoned her over. "Okay," she looked at her friend and left the table. They stepped back to the window. "Anthony," he introduced himself. "Julia," she answered him. "Are you a student at this institute?" he asked. "Yes, in my second year," she nodded. "And I'm in my fourth," he smiled. "Are you renting an apartment?" she guessed, because she had never seen him in a dormitory. "Yeah," he nodded. "Is it expensive?" she wondered. "It's fine. I make my own money," the guy shared with the girl. Julia looked at Anthony. She liked this guy. "And who are you by nationality?" he asked her. "Why do you ask that?" She was surprised. "Well, it's just that you have such a weird eye cut and black hair," he told her. "I'm American," she replied. "Come on, don't mind me. I was just asking," Anthony smirked. "Let's go back to the table," Julia called out to him. They went back to the table, now sitting side by side. Anthony had been joking all evening, she laughed. He was fun to be with. "So, how do you like the new guy?" her girlfriend asked her when they came into the room in the evening. "Wow, I like him," she admitted to her honestly. "So, are you going to be friends?" Kira wondered. "I don't know. He didn't offer anything. He didn't even set a meeting." They turned off the light in the room. Julia lay on her back and thought about Seriosa. She really liked this guy, but she didn't want to approach him first. The next day when they came to study at the first break, they met him. "Hi, and I'm waiting for you here," he said. "Hi," she blushed. She was pleased, but at the same time she was shy. "Let's go for a walk tonight," he offered her. "I don't know. It's cold outside," she told him. "And whoever stopped that?" "Let's go to a cafe," he invited her. "Okay, where shall we meet?" She heard the bell ring. "Why don't I pick you up at the dorm tonight?" he told her. "I'll be waiting." She looked at him and ran to the auditorium. "What did he say to you?" Kira whispered to her when class started. "He said he'd come by the dorm tonight to pick me up," Julia told her quietly. "Well, wow, we had a celebration." Kira laughed so that the teacher paid attention to her. Julia spent the rest of the school day thinking about Anthony. She didn't know what to wear on this date, since it was her first. On the one hand, it was cold outside, and she needed to wear something warm, but on the other hand, if they went to the cafe, she wouldn't freeze. When they got back to the dormitory, she already assumed what she would wear. The girl decided not to show off too much on the first day and put on jeans, a sweater, and a down jacket on top. Anthony picked her up at 7 in the evening, and they actually went to a nearby cafe. "I don't know what got me so hooked on you, but I've been thinking about you all night," the guy told her. "You have no idea, it was the same with me too," she blushed again. They ordered, nothing fancy, a bag of pistachios and a glass of beer each. "So tell me a little about yourself, who you are, where you come from, what you're studying for, and what you think about your future." "I'm an ordinary girl. I came from a neighboring town. Since I studied in the humanities class, I decided to enter the pedagogical school. I used to think that I would be a teacher, but recently a friend told me that with this education you can go to the museum," she began to tell me. "I'm also an ordinary guy, studying at the 4th year, as you already know, soon to finish. But I do not want to work in the profession." He was extremely honest with her. "And why?" She was surprised. "Why waste 5 years if you don't want to work in this profession?" "I don't know. I realized too late, but I need to get an education," he told her openly. "Everything is clear with you," she laughed. They were still sitting and talking, the young man as yesterday, joked without ceasing. The girl liked it, she laughed. She was easy with this young man. That evening Anthony saw Julia off. They agreed that they would meet tomorrow. The next day was a day off. They didn't have to go to school, so they could walk around all day. "So how was your walk?" her friend asked her when she came into the room. "Everything is great. We agreed to meet tomorrow, Julia answered. I see you two are getting serious, Kira said. Nellie listened with interest. For some reason, she was not privy to these topics. Julia and Anthony really started to meet. They couldn't live a day without each other. Now often the girl stayed overnight at the young man's house and went to school from him. If this goes on, then you will soon move to him, said her friends. Maybe I will, she laughed. And that would be the end of our friendship. Kira made a sad face. Nothing can end a true friendship, Julia told her. By summer, Anthony and Julia were already living together seriously, and when the vacations came, the girl invited the guy to meet her parents. He immediately agreed because he had serious plans for the girl. Mom, Dad, meet Anthony. This is Anthony. I told you about him. They went to her house when they arrived. Daughter, you should have at least warned her that you were not coming alone, her mother said reproachfully. I wanted it to be natural, so that no one would be prepared for anything, the girl answered her. They spent a month together in the city where Julia lived, slept in her room, and although her mother was against it, but Selena understood that her daughter had grown up, so she did not forbid her anything. It's your turn to meet my parents, Anthony told her as he left. Come on, 2 weeks before school starts, I will come to you, she told him because she wanted to be with her parents. Okay, I'll be waiting, and so bye. Call me. He kissed her, got on the train, and drove off. Julia returned home. Her mother looked at her adult daughter, realized that soon, most likely, she will get married. So how do you like your future son-in-law? She asked her mother. Even so, her mother tilted her head. He is very good. If you got to know him better, you would understand that, said the daughter. I believe you. The woman agreed with her. Next year, he will finish the 5th year, and then, while he is in the army, I will also finish my education, Julia told her mother. And where are you going to live? She asked her. I think in this city, Julia told her. That's good, her mother said, because her grandmother's apartment is empty, and she wanted you to have it all to yourself. It was the first time the woman had ever spoken of it. That's great news, Julia was pleased. She spent a month at home, and then, as promised, went to Anthony. Hello, she entered his apartment. Siriusha had only her mother. She met her warmly, hugged her, accepted her as her own daughter. Hello, Anthony has told me a lot about you, Natalie told her. I'm glad, she nodded her head. 2 weeks passed very quickly, and she got to know her mother better. The young people told her what their plans were. Anthony, you have chosen a very nice girl, praised his mom. Okay, do not embarrass. He saw how Julia blushes. After these words, the young man and the girl, the day before the start of school, got together and went. She to the dormitory, he to his apartment, which was still ready to rent for a year. Can't we move in together already? He asked her. No, Anthony, let's hold off, all in good time, she told him. Okay, he kissed her and they parted outside the dormitory. After that, every day it was either her at his place or him at hers. They met, went to caves, socialized with friends. Everything was very good. New Year's Eve was celebrated at Julia's parents' house, and Anthony's mother also came there to meet them. It was nice to be in such warm company, Selena said to Natalie. I'm glad our families are united too, the woman said. I'm leaving in May, and when I come back, I want to take your daughter as my wife, Anthony began to say. That's how long it will take, Selena sighed. Nothing, while the service, study, and everything else. The time will pass quickly, said her daughter. She looked at her chosen one, and she felt good that now they were all sitting together and communicating as a family. Yes, I agree that you will have no time to relax, Selena nodded her head. The future in-laws spent 3 whole days together, and when it was time to part ways, neither one wanted to do it. Anthony, I love you, were the 2 young people. And how I love you, he kissed the girl and pressed her to him. Spring passed very quickly. May came, followed by graduation. After that, Anthony received a summons, and now he was going to go to the army. Are we going to do a send-off? Julia asked the boy. He probably shrugged his shoulders. Okay, Julia nodded her head. She thought about where and how it could be organized. Not 2 weeks later, Natalie, with the help of Selena, Julia's mother, was setting the tables. They were expecting guests. Julia, open up. Anthony heard a knock on the door. Now she was welcoming friends of her favorite person. They'd all sat down at the table together, the young guys and gals toasting to a successful service, and also to Julia's waiting for him. "I see you off as if not to the army, but to war," the girl told him. "Do not worry, my dear. Everything will pass quickly," he promised her. Anthony did not need anyone and nothing today. The most important thing was to be near his beloved, with whom he planned not to see for the next 2 years. In the morning, on the station platform, they hugged each other. "I love you, and I will wait for you," she told him. "I promised to write," he answered her. The train rumbled by, and the young man jumped on the footboard. He sent air kisses to Julia, to his mother, and to all who were at his send-off. And then the train moved, and he went from her. Only now the girl felt the tears come to her eyes. "Cry, don't hold it in," her mother told her. "Okay," Julia stepped aside, the tears flowing without ceasing. She realized that she would not see her beloved for a long time. The girl decided to hit the study, not to think about anything. Summer ended quickly. She helped her mother, then came the fall, and this study. She wrote Anthony every day and received letters from him, which were permeated with love. "Shall we go for a walk?" Kira called her. "No, I won't go anywhere. We have a lot of assignments. We still have to write a term paper," the girl said. She didn't want to set herself up and go somewhere. "All right, as you like," and we went. Nellie and Kira waved to her and left the room. But Julia wasn't bored. She was reading her lover's letters. She did other things. It was New Year's vacation time. She came home, her parents welcomed her, and Natalie was there again. "I couldn't stay at home alone, so I decided to come to you," she said. Yes, of course, Selena had met Natalie. Their families had become so close that now they couldn't even remember the time when they weren't related. "What if Anthony comes over and you two aren't together?" her mother told her later. "Well, you and Natalie are friends, so why don't you continue to be friends? Although I don't think Anthony and I will break up," Julia was sure. Time flew fast. It was already summer. When the girl came home, she offered her mother to return her grandmother's vegetable garden. "What's gotten into you all of a sudden?" Selena didn't understand. "I do not know. I want something to occupy myself," answered her daughter. The whole family went to the dacha, as they called it. They made beds there, planted everything. Everything was the same as before, with Grandma. "I don't believe that so many years have passed," sat down on a log the girl, and closed her eyes with her hands. "All people leave this world." Her mother sat down beside her. "Anthony will be back soon," her daughter told her. "Not soon enough," her mother stroked her head. The last year at the Institute was very difficult. It was necessary to start writing a diploma, several term papers, as well as sessions, GOS, and everything else. But Julia got through it all, and when she had her graduation, she stood at graduation and looked only at the front door. She believed he should come today. And when the ceremony was over, she saw him, all handsome in his military uniform. "Darling," she ran to him. He pressed her to him, and they stood together for a long time. There was still no one in the hall, so Anthony pulled Julia away from him, slipped his hand into his pocket, took out a small box, got down on one knee, and asked her to marry him. "I accept," she clapped her hands. The girl had indeed waited a long time for this. Now the two happy people stopped by Natalie's house, sat at her table, and then drove to the town where Julia lived. "Mama, Papa, we have arrived," shouted the girl in the customary manner. "Come on in, darlings," went the mother out into the hall. She had been roughly expecting them in these numbers. "Look," Julia showed her ring finger. "Jesus, honey, congratulations," their mother hugged them both. Julia was very happy to have her favorite people by her side, and soon she was going to marry one of them. "So, where are you going to live?" her mother asked her. "I don't know. If you let us, we'll take the place where grandmother used to live," the daughter said. "Of course we will. Grandma left you this apartment." Selena was happy for her children. "You know what I want to tell you, parents? You are the best." Julia hugged them. She and Anthony drove to the apartment where her grandmother used to live. "I haven't been here since she died," she confessed to the young man. "Are you having a hard time?" he asked her. "A little bit," she admitted honestly. "And what are we going to do about it?" he asked her. "Nothing. We'll change everything here so that nothing reminds me of her." Julia walked around the apartment and touched everything with her hands. Oh, look, and here is this picture, which all my childhood stressed me. She pointed to the picture where Ivan Savage rides on the gray wolf. A very old painting, I see. Anthony touched it with his hands. Yes, let's take it down so that it doesn't remind me of my childhood, the girl asked him. When they took the painting off the wall, they saw a small door behind it, as if it were a safe. What is it? Anthony asked her. I don't know. It's the first time I've seen it, she said. Come on, let's open it. He looked at her. Okay, come on. The girl reached out her hand and opened the door. Inside was something like a photo album. What is it? Anthony asked. Strange, said the girl. I don't see anything strange, her future husband told her. Just all the photos grandmother kept in her bag, and here is a photo album. Some other interesting. She took it out, went and sat on the bed. When Julia opened it, she turned white. After that, she started to reread everything it said. It was a kind of grandmother's diary, and why hadn't she found it before? Shall I leave you? Anthony asked her. Yes, if you don't mind, she asked him. Okay, out of the way, he went outside. Julia sat, looking through, and rereading everything in the scrapbook. Here's her grandmother young. Here she is getting a job at the local factory. This is after high school. Here's a postcard of some kind. That was the first piece of news. What did it all mean? Julia couldn't understand. She flipped through the pages, and the third page was the most interesting. There was a picture of her grandmother standing next to a man of Asian appearance, signed Zhang Feng Wei at the bottom. And underneath the photo was a letter of confession. Darling, I can't stay here all the time. I'm expected back home, so I have to leave you behind. Always your Vi. Julia sat there, looking at it all and crying. So that's where it came from, she realized. The beginning detailed how two Koreans had come to town, how everyone laughed at their names, and afterward, one was spelled Victor and the other Frederick. Julia couldn't believe that this was really the whole story about her grandmother. She had always been the perfect person for her, and now such a thing was being revealed. My beloved Victor, I've missed you so much. I decided to write, though I don't know whether this letter will reach you or we will never see or hear from each other, wrote her grandmother, and it was pasted under the photo of the two of them. There was also an envelope, on which it was written in red letters, "Return to sender." Tears came to the girl's eyes. She realized that her grandmother had loved and waited for the same man all her life. So that's why I have such a cut eye. She touched her slightly swollen eyelids. Julia sat back and looked through the album further. The further she flipped through, the more and more she realized. Didn't Mom know about this? She asked herself. But Julia wasn't in a hurry to show it to anyone. She wanted to figure it out for herself first. She turned page after page and learned more and more about her beloved grandmother. Hi, my love. I thought I'd write to you. I'm doing well. I don't know how you are. You probably blame me for everything, and I deserve it. But I can't do anything else. I have a family, a house, children, and I can't come back to you. Victor wrote to her. Each letter was accompanied by a postcard or a photo. How much I love you, and I do not hold a grudge against you. I know that it is difficult for you, but you hold on. I love you, Grandma answered him. And since the letter was here, she was just answering, but she didn't send anything. Beloved, look at the views from our window. He sent another picture, and everything was really beautiful there. And then she would reply to him, describing how she felt. While Julia was reading this picture book, she cried more than once. Finally, she got to the last page, and there was a picture of her mother, just as she had suspected. Anthony, she looked outside from the window. Yes, are you finished? He was sitting on the bench. Come in, please, Julia asked him. The young man quickly went up to the floor. And what did you find out there? He wondered. Look, she showed him the last photo, which was also accompanied by a caption. And what is this? He did not understand. This is my grandmother, and in her arms is my mother. Julia looked at the young man. I see, and so, he pointed at the man, it's her father. It turns out so, the girl was still in shock. Wow, so that's how you got those eyes, he reminded her. He had asked her that the first time they met. Only I don't understand why Grandma was hiding all this. Julia didn't know what to do now, whether her mother knew about it or not. Well, what to guess now? You should go and ask her directly, he advised his future wife. I'll do so. You can work here alone, and I'll go to my mother, she asked him. Okay, he agreed. Julia took the album, put it in a bag, and went to her parents. She had a lot of things to think about while she was walking. What, where, and how. Why are you here? Selena was surprised when she saw her daughter coming home. I need to talk to you. She looked intently at her mother. Talk. I'm listening to you. Her mother was worried. She couldn't understand what was going on with her daughter. Did they have a fight with Anthony? After all, she came alone. Let's go to the kitchen, was puzzled daughter. They went into the kitchen, sat down at the table. Do you know who your father is? The first thing the girl asked. You know I don't. It seems to me that you and I had already talked about it, her mother told her. Yeah, and today we went to Grandma's house. I decided to change everything there. And the first thing I did was take down this old painting right here. She pulled it out first. Yeah, I remember it. It was hanging in the little room, Selena confirmed. So, and behind it was something like a safe. Behind the painting, the girl pulled out an album. What is it? Selena didn't understand. An album where grandmother kept her most precious memories, Julia said. I don't understand. Selena looked up at her daughter. Look at it, Julia advised her. The woman opened the cover and immediately saw a Korean man in the photo and read all the captions below the photo. And most importantly, you'll still have time to read it all. Julia opened to the penultimate page. There Olivia stood with a little girl in her arms, in whom the woman recognized herself. And at the bottom was an inscription that she would never forget the one who had given her the most precious gift of her life. What, you mean this man, my father? Tears spurted from Selena's eyes. She wouldn't lie, especially since they never saw each other again. He sent her postcards and hers never reached him. She showed the inscriptions. Julia, I don't believe my mother could be like this, the woman said through tears. But this album says otherwise. She showed her all the new letters and photos. Yes, I see it all. Selena turned to the window and stared at one point. And what are we going to do? The daughter asked, and looked at her mother. I don't know, she answered honestly. Listen, do you want to know the relatives or the man himself, if he is still alive? Julia was very interested in all this. I want to, but I'm afraid, Selena admitted honestly. Well, let me do it myself, her daughter asked. To be honest, you really shocked me today, Selena said. You can't imagine how shocked I was when I saw all this. Julia remembered the emotion she felt when she first saw it all. I imagine Selena heard the front door slam. It was Barry coming home. He made his way into the kitchen. The women had told him everything. He just didn't say anything, sat down on a chair, took a long look, and didn't say anything. And I wondered who our Russian girl had those eyes in. He looked at Julia. And Anthony asked me about it too, the girl confessed. What are you going to do? He looked at the women. I want to apply for Wait For Me. The girl did not want to hide anything from her parents. This is good, but imagine that the relatives on the other side will be against it, will not offend you. Immediately warned her father. No, she was sure of it. Good, then go ahead. Barry wished her good luck. While they were talking, Selena sat like that, staring at one point. Julia packed up all her things and headed back home. She didn't know that Anthony had peeled off almost all the wallpaper, and it wouldn't be comfortable for them to sleep there. Oh, it's so dusty. The girl entered the apartment. Yeah, I don't think we should stay here. He came over and hugged her. Then let's go back to her parents, Julia laughed. It was funny for her to go back and forth today. Okay, we'll do it there, they agreed. When the young people entered Barry and Selena's apartment, they were surprised that they were going from one apartment to another. But when they explained that their apartment was being renovated, they were understood and were not kicked out. Selena didn't want to talk to anyone today. She went to her room and spent the rest of the evening there. During this time, Julia went to the show's website. She entered all the information to apply. When the form opened up to her, she began to type in the first name, last name, middle name, who she was looking for. The girl filled out the application on her mother's behalf. When it was finished, she hit the submit button. That's it. Now all that's left to do is wait. She turned to Anthony. Yes, and I hope it will happen very quickly, he was sure. Good if it does, she smiled with just her lips. After that, the young people went to bed. The girl thought that tomorrow she would already have some kind of answer. Even if it was negative, it was also a result. She pressed herself against Anthony. Only one day had passed. But today so many events had happened that it seemed to Julie that a whole week had passed. The morning is wiser, Anthony kissed her and they turned off the light. Julia couldn't sleep for a long time. She kept thinking about her grandmother, how she could keep this secret for so many years. And with these thoughts, she fell asleep. In her dream, she dreamt of the same Chang Feng. He was reaching out to her, asking for something. Julia woke up in tears. First thing in the morning, she went to the computer to see what was wrong with her application. Anthony, she screamed in a voice that didn't sound right. Why are you yelling? He jumped up from the bed. I got an answer. She stared at the monitor, unable to believe this was really happening. What did they say? He walked over to the monitor. The screen said they needed to contact the program editors. Julia didn't think long. She picked up her phone and dialed the number that was listed in the reply message. Hello, shouted the girl as soon as there was an answer on the other end. Did you apply? Began to speak in a monotone voice. Julia even thought it was a recording. Yes, I found an old photo album at my grandmother's house, and there are pictures of her and my mom, as well as her father, who no one knew about until yesterday. The girl spoke quickly. So, is everything on the application form correct? Asked her on the other end. Yes, she nodded her head, though it was unnecessary. We will check everything and get back to you, said goodbye to Julia, and she hung up. I don't believe it can all come out so quickly. She looked at her husband-to-be. Why not? He didn't understand. I don't know. The girl was worried. After that, they went to the kitchen to have breakfast. There, Selena started asking for details. If Julia couldn't sleep at night, and then she dreamed various things, Selena couldn't sleep at all that night. She kept wondering how her mother could do such a thing. Now they will figure it out, and then it will be clear what to do next, the daughter said. The apartment needed to be renovated. The wedding was scheduled for the end of summer. By this time, I wanted to finish everything. But the young people, or rather, Julia did not have a thought about repairs. All she could think about now was her mother and her father. Well, are you not going there again today? Anthony asked her. I will. There was nothing left for the girl to do. Then let's go. He was waiting for her. In her grandmother's apartment, the wallpaper had already been torn off. Now they had to prime the walls, and they could glue new ones. To the store, Anthony asked after the priming was finished. Isn't that enough for today? Julia asked. If you don't want to glue, then at least help you choose what to buy. He knew he couldn't handle it himself. Okay, let's go, she agreed. In the store, they spent a good 3 hours. All could not decide on the type of wallpaper. Finally, they chose one that was sufficient in the warehouse and they both liked it. So they went home. Where have you been so long? Selena met them. First in the apartment and then in the store, Julia told her. Had you at least eaten? Her mother was worried. No, but believe me, it wasn't about that. Julia hugged the woman. It's okay. I don't think I'm as worried as you are, she told her daughter. It's okay. They walked to the kitchen, had something to eat, and then went to their room. What's up? Anthony looked at Julia. Nothing. She looked at the monitor. That's okay. He was undressing for bed. Yeah, I think so too, she admitted to him. So 2 weeks passed. During this time, young people, not without the help of parents, made repairs in one room. Of course, it was cosmetic, but it was enough. After a while, Julia got a phone call. Hello, she picked up the phone. Hello, have you contacted the program? They asked her. Yes, I'm looking for my grandfather and my mother for my father, she said. Okay, everything that was asked on your parameters, we checked. Now you need to take a DNA test. And only then we will invite you to the program, frustrated her editor. Great, when and where to come? Julia wondered. When everything was explained to her, she told her mother her presence was not necessary, but she still wanted to go. Mom, we need to buy tickets. They came home. It's mandatory, Selena. As much as she wanted to know the truth, she dreaded it. Please, so much work has already been done. Let's not back down, her daughter begged her. Okay, you're taken, agreed the mother. 2 days later, they were already sitting at the airport, waiting for their flight. Are you nervous? Julia asked her mother. I won't say yes, but I can't say definite no. I can't say, the woman said, and didn't look at her daughter. They flew in by invitation, went into the lab, took all the necessary tests. If it turns out to be your father, Well, he's still alive. So if you thought you were an orphan, you can forget about it, the lab technician told her. What are you talking about? How old is he now? Celine looked at him with big eyes. Asians are long-lived, he smiled. Selena and Julia went outside. They breathed in the fresh air. They had to fly home again. So what do you think? The mother asked her daughter. Let's not think anything. Just wait for the results. She didn't want to be nervous for a while. Okay, she agreed with her. They flew home quietly. Anthony and Julia went about the renovation of the apartment, and Barry and Selena went on with their normal lives. Time dragged by very slowly. For a period of time, Selena and her daughter even seemed to forget that they had an important case going on somewhere. They were distracted by renovations and wedding preparations. Do you think we'll pick out a dress here? The daughter said to her mom. I don't know, but can we at least look? Selena asked. Okay, they went to another store. But Julia didn't believe, not at all, that they would be able to find anything. They were measuring one wedding dress after another when the girl's phone rang. Hello. She put her finger to her lips, showing her mother to be quiet. Hello. Did you apply to find a relative and take a DNA test? A male voice spoke up. Yes, you're right, glanced Julia at her mother. We invite you to the TV program that will be held in 2 weeks, said the same voice in the receiver. Thank you, we will definitely be there, disconnected Julia. And what? Waited the mother for her verdict. They're inviting us, Julia smiled. They need a show. We are test subjects, said the woman. Why the negativity? The girl didn't understand. Well, why? Now on our television only, so, was sure Selena. Okay, let it be so, but we'll still go, was sure Julia. Well, you started it. You decide whether we go or not, Selena said as if she didn't want to. That's great. The girl was happy. They got everything ready for the wedding. They bought tickets to Washington. And now they just have to wait for the date they need to leave. If it turns out that he is your father and my grandfather, he will even make it to our wedding in time, Julia said. Yes, the woman agreed with her. And that day came. They arrived at the studio, now sat, and waited for their exit to be announced. The supposed relatives did not see each other. They were in different rooms. Julia was the first to be called into the studio and was asked what and how she had learned. She began her story with the fact that she was brought up with her grandmother, loved her more than anyone else on Selene. Then how she was passing away, well, and at the very end, how they came to the apartment and found the album. And you think your mother is the daughter of J and Ji Feng Wei? They asked her a question. Here, she handed them the album that belonged to her grandmother. You can see for yourself. Yes, indeed, it seems to be true. The host flipped through the pages. So it is true. Julia almost cried. Well, at the end of the program, it will be clear. It was obvious that the presenter was making a show out of it. Now Julia believed that there was no victor, that now their story would be told, and then they would say that they took a test, but it was negative. The girl sat on the couch, looked at the presenter, and waited to see what would happen next. Well, let's see a fragment from the life of our heroes, said the young man who hosted the show. On the screen, the footage flashed, which was clearly not the US. Selena saw it too from the room where she was sitting. Tears came to Julia's eyes. Had they really found the person who was in the pictures of her grandmother's album? Well, you'll recognize someone in these shots. The presenter looked at the picture and then shifted his gaze to Julia. She was silent because no one had been shown yet. She looked with all her eyes, but she didn't see anyone. Why don't you say anything? The man who was in charge looked at her. I don't know what to say, she said honestly. Well, say something. Do you even believe that we found someone? He asked as if he was mocking her. Are you kidding me? She was ready to fall to the ground in shame. Why did she believe these people? They just wanted to make a show and they did. Why, no one is mocking, shrugged the presenter. He was looking at the screen as well as Julia. And at the same moment, an old man appeared on the screen. He was sitting on a bench near the house. And yes, he remotely resembled the one Julia had seen in the picture. The girl's heart beat faster, her hands shook. Did you recognize him? The host saw her excitement. I don't know, she was fiddling with her handkerchief. I think you recognize someone. The host sat down next to her. Is he here? The girl looked at him. Yes, he nodded and smiled, but we'll call your mother here first. The music started playing and Selena walked into the studio. "Hello," the host said hello to her. "Good evening," she sat down next to her daughter. "Well, how do you feel? Did we find your father?" Looked at her, who led the program. I don't know if Selena was ready to burst into tears, but I do know Zhang Fengwei, "Come here to the studio," he called out. "No way." Julia clutched her face. "We can do anything. Miracles happen." Everyone in the studio applauded. An elderly man came out here. He stood in front of Selena and Julia. He was crying. "Daughter, forgive me," he said in broken Russian. "Hello." Naturally, Selena did not perceive him in any way. "So you want to know if this is your father or not?" asked the host. Of course, everyone was in suspense. "Then I invite an expert here in the studio." He put out his hand. A woman came out who was holding an envelope in her hands. She stood in the middle of the room and looked around. After that, she took out the results from the envelope. So the alleged father, Zhang Fengwei, and the alleged daughter, Celine. The possibility of parentage is, she stopped talking and looked at the people present. "Come on," Julia stepped forward. 99.9%. Applause erupted in the hall. "Daughter," a man jumped up from his seat. "I can't call you daddy." She stood up and walked over to him. They approached each other and embraced. The audience did not stop applauding. Julia sat looking at her mother and cried. "So what are you going to say now?" The host came up to them. "I can't tell you anything now." It was obvious that Selena was at a loss. "Why did you find your father?" the presenter asked her. "I knew all my life that I didn't have one, and now I have one, and I'm just shocked." Selena looked at the man. He was holding her hand. "Well, what do you think?" He turned to Victor, as he was known here. "I wasn't expecting it," he said. "I was coming here for an internship and I met Olivia. We were only with her for a few months and then I moved back. I wrote to her, but she didn't answer me." All of this was told by a man with a heavy accent. "So how come she didn't reply?" Julia put in a word. "Here, look at this." Chang Feng picked up the album and started flipping through it, tears flowing from his eyes. "She must have misread my handwriting, so she misspelled the address," he said regretfully. "That's it. Now you know you have a daughter, and you know you have a father. How do you feel about it?" The presenter continued his show. Incomprehensibly, Selena looked at him. She wanted to leave the studio sooner. Outside in the car, her husband was waiting for her along with Anthony. They said goodbye to everyone, got up, and walked out of the studio. When they were outside, Selena called her father into the car. "I didn't come alone," he said. "Who did you come with?" Julia became agitated. "My children and grandchildren are with me, just like you. We all came together," he said. "And where are you staying?" Selena asked. "In a hotel," he answered. "So let's go there quickly." The women couldn't wait to see their relatives. Together they drove to the hotel, and when they entered the room, their eyes became a little bigger than they were. It turned out that Selena's father had 6 children of his own, and they had several grown children of their own. "Wow, that's a lot of family," Julia said. "That's not all. There are still relatives back home." Chan Feng's children and grandchildren did not speak Russian, so they had to communicate through their grandfather. But even so, the relatives understood each other. "I insist that you come to us," said Selena. She had lived with her mother, her husband, her daughter, and her mother-in-law, and no other relatives. And here, it turns out, she has a very large extended family. "Children, do you mind?" Grandpa turned to his family. "Of course not," answered the oldest son, who could speak a little Russian. Together they booked tickets and drove to the town where Selena, Barry, and Julia lived. Natalie was invited to visit, as well as Selena's mother-in-law. All the extended family couldn't even fit in one apartment. "And I want to tell you that you are just in time for our wedding," Julia told them. In a week's time, there was going to be a celebration, and everyone who was here was invited. The week passed very quickly, and now Anthony and Julia stood before the registrar, and she asked them if they agreed to become husband and wife to each other. The young ones said yes, and then they exchanged rings. Next, everyone got into their cars and the fun began. First, they went to take pictures, then they went to the restaurant. Not a single person left the wedding. Everyone congratulated the newlyweds. Julia looked at all the relatives and could not believe that now she has so many relatives. "How are you feeling?" The newlyweds came home. "Very well," she told her husband. They had arrived home, and now they wanted to discuss how everything had gone. The relatives were housed partly at Selena's, partly at the hotel. You know, Anthony, I am the happiest woman on Selene, she looked at her husband. And I'm happy because you're happy, he hugged her. You can imagine I lived for 20 years without one relative. I had a mom, dad, grandmother, and even then one died. And now, look how many relatives I have. But they are not to embrace, rejoiced Julia. The newlyweds talked a little more and went to bed. Tomorrow, they began a real adult life. In the morning, they went to their mother's house, and other relatives came up there too. They sat at the table for a while and then went to see the relatives off. At the airport, they all agreed that they would meet exactly 1 year later. But during that year, they would return phone calls and emails. I'm so happy to have you, Julia hugged everyone. And we're so glad, granddaughter, said her grandfather. When the plane left, everyone got in the car and drove home. I still can't believe that I have a father and so many brothers, nephews and grandnephews, Selena said. What can you do? You have to believe, her daughter hugged her. And it's all thanks to you, my sweetheart, her mom hugged her. Imagine how it happens in life. You have no one, and then one day in a whole family. Julia herself has not yet in her head that all these relatives appeared to her. Why did you take that picture? Mom was complaining about her daughter changing her grandmother's apartment. You know how much I loved her. I just wanted to change everything so it would be different, she told her. Yeah, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have found anyone. Selena shook her head. After that, everyone went home. Julia had to get a job. Anthony had already found a place too. They were all happy. Not 6 months later, Julia fell sick. You're pregnant? Her husband immediately looked at her. Why did you immediately think I was pregnant? It was just dizziness. She was a little scared. I really want you to be pregnant, her husband looked at her. The next day, Julia went to the doctor. At first, she wanted to buy a test, but then she decided that the doctor would have a 100% result. Who's last in line to get pregnant? She asked in the hallway. One of the women answered her. She took the line, sat, and wondered how she would get into the office. And when she entered and sat down in front of the doctor, he looked at her through his glasses and asked her what she was complaining about. I'm pregnant, she told him. The delay at the test, how did you know that? He asked her. I just know, that's all. Julia felt like an idiot now. Okay, come to the chair and let's see, said the gynecologist. The girl undressed, climbed on the chair. The doctor began the examination, while he frowned his eyebrows, moved his lips. And when all finished, he went to the table and began to write. Doctor, what is it? She asked him. I'm afraid to be wrong, but I think you have a uterine myoma. He looked at her over his glasses. I don't understand. The patient looked at him. And what is not clear? I write you a referral to ultrasound. Only there you can determine whether your diagnosis is confirmed or not. He handed her a paper. How likely are you to be right? She was wondering. I can't answer your question. He was taking notes. Okay, thank you. The girl wanted to cry. She took the referral, went home. What's wrong with you? She went to her mother. Look, she handed her a paper. What's this? Mom started reading it. Here, I thought I was pregnant, Julia said. What do you think? She waited for her mom to tell her. We have to go for an ultrasound, she told her. No, Julia didn't want to know there was something wrong. Well, your problems, think. But sooner or later you'll have to go, Selena was sure of it. Oh, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Julia didn't want to bring it up. Why did you come to me then? Selena didn't understand. Just show. The daughter got up from the table and headed for the exit. Think, it's your life and your health, her mother said in her back. Good, she didn't even turn around. The girl walked home. She didn't look around, only at her feet. When she got home, she was greeted by Anthony. Well, what did the doctor tell you? He asked her. Nothing, not pregnant. She wouldn't tell him anything. Okay, why are you so crazy? He followed her. Don't go, please, she asked him. Okay, but can you tell me why you're so upset? He was interrogating her. Look in your purse, she told him. Now Anthony returned to the hallway. He took the report out of her purse, read it, went to the bedroom where Julia was. What do you think? She looked up at him. If you don't want to be examined, don't go. Anthony put his arm around his wife. Okay, she lay face down on the pillow and cried. What if it's true? He hugged her. And if it wasn't, she was impenetrable. I think we should go for an ultrasound and then suffer. Anthony told her he didn't want to hurt his wife. He even felt sorry for her, but walking around in ignorance wasn't good either. Anthony understand. I will not go to the operation, she told him. Who said anything about surgery? He didn't understand. You understand, if the ultrasound diagnosed that I have a myoma, then it will be necessary to go to surgery. She was sure of it. Well, let's wait a little, he agreed with her. And let's go to Korea to my grandfather, she told him. Are you sure about that? He was just shocked at what she was suggesting. Of course I'm sure, she looked at him. Not 2 weeks later, Anthony and Julia were sitting in the airport, waiting to board their flight. Did you at least give them a heads up? Anthony asked her. Of course, we wouldn't have gone without it. I even called my mom with me, but she didn't agree. Julia told him she was very sad. Well, promise me when we get there, you'll go to the ultrasound. It was very important to him. Okay, I will definitely go to the ultrasound, but only when I decide and tune in, she told him and kissed him on the cheek. They flew to the relatives. They were met. Everything was as good as it could be. Grandpa, who had recently found a granddaughter, a daughter, a son-in-law, and all the other relatives, was very happy about it. Naturally, no one told him about his granddaughter's illness, but he didn't need to know. Anthony and Julia stayed there for exactly a week, then they came back. He went straight to work, and she was hesitant and couldn't get in the mood to go for an ultrasound. It had been almost 3 months since that appointment when she got the referral, and Julia was in the mood. She made an appointment for an ultrasound. She arrived, got in line. Who's last in line? She asked. What are you in for? She was asked by visitors who were already here. On pregnancy, she said, and let that she lied, but so that no one knew and did not pity her. Then you'll follow me, said one of the women. It turned out that that woman was second in line, and when she passed, Julia let 2 people go ahead of her. She was afraid to hear the diagnosis, but when there was no one left in the hallway and the girl lab technician came out and invited her into the office, there was nothing left to do but go in. Julia lay down on the couch. The doctor took her referral. She read it, curled her lips, and began to look. The woman who was doing the ultrasound, her name was Leslie. After a moment, she smiled and said, Girl, I congratulate you. You are pregnant. You are 18 weeks. After that, she smiled for a long time. Julia cried. Why are you crying? The woman who did the ultrasound asked her. Did you see what my diagnosis was? She told her about the referral. How can a doctor make a diagnosis without an ultrasound? Leslie didn't understand. That diagnosis was in doubt, and I'm telling you, you're pregnant. She looked at her and smiled. Julia's mood immediately lifted. What am I supposed to do now? She was being silly. Go and get registered, Leslie told her. Okay, I hear you. Julia got up off the couch. I wish you happiness. The doctor looked at her. Thank you. The girl was grateful to her. She drove home, and inside everything was blooming and smelling. Julia couldn't wait to tell her husband and mom that they would soon become a grandmother and father. Hello, my love. She entered the apartment. Honey? He looked at her questioningly. Yes, she nodded her head. Yes, what? Anthony didn't understand. You're going to be a daddy soon. She walked up to him and kissed him. Love, I'm happy. He jumped up, hugged her, and kissed her. We have to tell Mom. She was crying. Why are you crying? He didn't understand. I'm happy, she told her husband. And I'm happy. He spun her around. They packed up and drove first to Julia's parents' house. Mommy, I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother soon, she told her. My darling, I'm so happy for you. She hugged her son-in-law and daughter. And I am so happy that this myoma has turned into a child. The girl rejoiced. We need to tell the grandparents, although this word was unfamiliar to them, but they were saying it now. Julia started calling her second grandmother first, the one who cried as soon as she heard the news. And then the call was to her grandfather, who first laughed and then cried. I will definitely come to the birth, he promised. Listening, but what if we have a Korean baby? Anthony suddenly realized. So what? She looked at him. No, nothing now. He winked at her. What do you mean? She didn't understand his answer. They drove home, hailed the cab, got in it, held hands. What did you mean? She hinted at what he'd said about the Korean kid. No. Imagine what would have happened if we hadn't found out your grandfather was Korean, he laughed. What would have happened? She didn't know what he meant. Imagine I come to the hospital and two Russian people have a baby born narrow-eyed and black-haired, he said. Yes, so what? You wouldn't believe me, she wondered. Anything is possible, they talked. It turns out you don't believe me. She removed her hand from his arm. You misunderstand me. He wanted to take it back. No, Julia got out of the car. Darling, wait, think about it. It's true, he was catching up with her. I don't know, she went into the driveway. The next day, Julia went to the gynecology clinic, got registered. Now she started her follow-up. About the conversation with her husband, she did not forget. The girl began to read literature. It turned out that her husband was right. National peculiarities are always manifested only after a generation. Now she understood what Anthony meant. I'm sorry, she was already 7 months pregnant. For what? He didn't remember anything. I realize now that you were right then, she hugged him. I love you, he kissed her. And I love you. She couldn't believe things could be so good. When Julia was 7 months pregnant, she was admitted to the hospital. She didn't refuse because she wanted her baby to be born healthy. An IV, a nurse came into the room. Good, Julia smiled towards her. Oh, what an unusual appearance you have. The girl looked at her. Yes, my grandfather is Korean. Julia said it as if she was proud of it. That's exotic, the girl told her. That's proud. He worked in our town in a factory as a chief engineer, she bragged. You're a smart girl for having such an opinion about your grandfather. Now the girl was already proud of her patient. For 2 whole months, Julia was lying in labor, but she did not regret it, as long as all was well with the child. When it all started, she was taken to the prenatal ward. The fetus is large, the head nurse warned her. And what to do? The girl wrinkled her nose in pain. Now the doctor will come and tell you everything, she said. For now, they only supported the flow of labor. Breathe, breathe. The doctor shouted at her. I can't, she cried, it hurts. Everything will be fine, he tried, but nothing worked. To be on the safe side, the gynecologist told Julia to go to surgery. There she was given anesthesia and the surgery began. I don't feel well, she screamed. Be patient, sister, the surgeon and the gynecologist appealed to her. When the baby was taken out of the mother's body, the doctor looked at it for a long time. He saw her husband come to her. He was definitely not a Kazakh, not a gypsy or anything else. He was definitely Russian. Julia, are you sure you won't have any problems with your husband? He showed her the child. My favorite, Maximka, she said, and turned her head to the right. So you didn't answer my question. He waited. What could be the problem? She didn't understand. Your child clearly doesn't look Russian, he said bluntly. Because my grandfather is Korean, she smiled, though she felt bad. Now everything is clear, he handed the child to the pediatrician. After that, she was moved to a room, and then the baby was moved there. A couple hours later, Anthony came in. Where's my son? He was standing under the window. Now Julia got up. And my grandson? The girl heard him. Wait, she was in pain, but she was ready to show this child to everyone. Grandpa said he would come when you were released from the hospital, said a happy Selena. I love you all, she put her hand to the window. 3 days later, Julia and the baby were discharged. When they left the hospital, they were greeted by Grandpa Victor with flowers.